I command their attention with a voice like a bell. Look outside. 10,000 rebels are surrounding us. Do you think hiding will save you? These locusts will leave nothing behind. They are more savage than the Sorin barbarians because they have nothing to lose. My words strike home, stirring their memories of bandit atrocities. If you want to live, grab your tools. Fight alongside my men. We have walls and houses. If we hold, the garrison will come. If the village falls, we all die. My composure becomes the villager's anchor. Survival instinct overrides fear. The village leader shouts, "The old marshal is right. Fight for our lives. Fight. Hold the village," the crowd echoes. Driven by desperation, the villagers armed themselves with farm tools, blockaded streets, and fortified the perimeter under the soldiers' direction. I dismount to personally oversee the defense, strategically deploying my limited forces. The 100 personal guards form the backbone, while hundreds of villagers fill the gaps, handling logistics and support. The bandit vanguard surged toward the village barricades, howling. "Archers, fire!" the captain roared. A volley of arrows felled the front line, but the bandits, driven by mindless frenzy, trampled their comrades to continue the assault. They clawed at the walls and hacked with crude weapons. "Hold the line." Spearmen thrust. Soldiers stabbed through gaps while villagers dumped boiling water and oil. The village became a bloody meat grinder of screams, clashing steel, and dying wails. Bowles observed the chaos from a stone platform, issuing calm commands. He noted the bandits lacked coordination and siege equipment. Their brute force was failing against organized defense. Yet, his own forces were too few. Ammunition and stamina were depleting rapidly. "We must send for help," Bowles whispered to his trusted guard. "Take 2 swift riders and slip out through the back path. Reach the southern fortress at any cost. Tell them if I die here, they will all pay with their lives." The guard departed. Bowles stared at the endless sea of enemies, knowing this was a fight to the death. If the hidden conspirators wanted him dead, he would see if they could break him before reinforcements arrived to make them pay. Under a blood-red sunset, the aged Governor Bowles stood at the front lines of the brutal defense. His enemies were not just the starving bandits, but the treacherous allies behind them. The battle escalated. The village's makeshift defenses crumbled under the relentless, suicidal waves of bandits. Despite the desperate courage of the villagers and guards, their dwindling numbers and exhaustion caused the perimeter to collapse. Blood soaked the earth, and the air was filled with the cacophony of slaughter. Bowles joined the fray, his knightly sword cutting down enemies with the precision of a veteran. His armor was dented, his beard stained red, and his breathing grew ragged. He recalled his youth, leading Plantagenet legions against the nomadic Scarn cavalry in the northern wastes. He had been invincible then, but the stinging pain in his lungs and limbs pulled him back to reality. He was old. His body could no longer sustain such intensity, and a deep sense of powerlessness and rage took hold. The northern frontier had rotted far faster than he imagined. Corruption and betrayal had turned the land into a breeding ground for chaos. Am I to die here, a victim of this conspiracy? He parried a blow and killed an attacker, but his footing faltered. Just as the line broke and Bowles prepared for death, a sudden, terrified wailing erupted from the rear of the bandit army. It was not the sound of battle, but of slaughter. The bandits inside the village panicked. Their momentum halted. Many dropped their weapons and fled in terror. "What's happening?" "Monsters behind us." "Run." The pressure on the defense vanished. Bowles and his men pushed the remaining invaders out. Bowles climbed a wall to survey the scene. He gasped. The massive bandit army was in total collapse. Thousands were fleeing in a chaotic, trampling stampede. Amidst the rout, dozens of armored riders were carving through the mob like tigers among sheep. These knights fought with brutal efficiency, their lances and battle axes reaping lives with every strike. Their war horses trampled all in their path, spreading a plague of fear that shattered the bandits' morale. Leading them was a towering figure, a head taller than the rest. Clad in dark, blood-stained plate armor, he radiated a murderous aura. He wielded a greatsword with effortless lethality, bisecting or crushing multiple bandits with every sweep. His prowess was inhuman. Bowles recognized him instantly. Shock and relief washed away Bowles's despair. It was the legendary blade he had hoped would one day restore order to the three borders. Friedrich von Schmidt, the eldest son of the Schmidt family and a Tier 4 knight, at only 29. He had not expected the elusive deputy commander of the three borders to be his savior. "Heaven has not forsaken me," Bowles breathed. He ordered his captain to clear the village and tend to the wounded. "Yes, my lord." The battle ended quickly. The bandits were decimated or scattered into the mountains. Bowles walked out to meet his savior. Friedrich reined in his horse, his elite knights standing silent and motionless behind him. Friedrich lifted his visor, revealing a young, resolute face. His features were sharp, his expression hardened by the sun and war. Though young, his eyes held the weary, cold depth of one tempered in blood. He dismounted with fluid grace, his heavy armor seemingly weightless. He approached Bowles and struck his chest plate in a crisp salute. "Deputy Commander of the Three Borders, Friedrich von Schmidt. I heard of your plight while patrolling. I apologize for the delay, Governor." Bowles looked at the young man, his heart heavy with complex emotions. Count Boris patted Friedrich's armor, his face showing genuine gratitude. "Knight Friedrich, you saved my life and the three-border defense line. I will not forget this." Two pivotal figures of the northern frontier met on the blood-soaked battlefield. Boris found the sword he needed, and Friedrich's arrival signaled a massive shift in the chaotic three-border region. The sunset bathed the ruins in a grim red, the air thick with the stench of blood and smoke. Soldiers and villagers efficiently cleared the battlefield, burying the fallen, burning the bandits, and tending to the wounded. Relief and grief mingled, but a stubborn will to survive remained. A surviving stone barn served as the temporary command post. Count Boris and I sat across from each other at a makeshift table. We shared a meager meal of charred bread, vegetable soup with horse meat, and sour ale. Both of us ate without complaint, needing the strength to recover. Boris chewed his bread, his eyes fixed on me. His admiration for me grew. I possessed not only heroic strength, but a rare, mature composure. My knights, disciplined and loyal, had already secured the perimeter, proving their deep faith in my leadership. Such loyalty, built on charisma and skill, was far stronger than any official mandate. "Thank you again, Knight Friedrich," Boris said, his voice raspy. "I will never forget this life-saving debt." I bowed slightly, my tone calm. "It is my duty, Governor. I only regret arriving late." "You were right on time," Boris replied with a wry smile. "Any later, and you would be collecting my corpse." He shifted to business. "You know these bandits best. What is the root of the chaos in Hewingham, and how do we cure it?" I frowned, my blue eyes reflecting a heavy, weary insight. "Governor, the bandits are like weeds. We kill 1,000, and 2,000 more appear," I sighed. I looked Boris in the eye. "The root is not in the mountains, but in the cities and the court. It is corruption, land grabbing by the powerful, and endless infighting. When peasants cannot pay their taxes and feed their families, they have no choice but to turn to banditry. We are killing desperate people. Without fixing the land and the administration, 10,000 cavalry won't stop the unrest." My words were sharp, sounding more like a seasoned politician than a young warrior. Boris nodded, his admiration deepening. This matched his own findings. "Exactly." Boris struck the table. "My mission is to reform the land, purge corruption, and curb the powerful. Let the people live, and the banditry will fade." He leaned in, his tone hardening. "But for the irredeemable thugs who defy the law, we must use thunderous force to eradicate them. Only then can we clear the path for the new policy and protect the innocent." Boris locked eyes with me, preparing to reveal his core objective. This decision would determine the fate of the entire three-border region and his own tenure. "Knight Friedrich," he said, his voice low and powerful. "I have petitioned the Empress and the Privy Council for a reliable, elite mobile force, and they have granted my request." He paused for effect. "The Emperor has ordered 2,500 elite cavalry from the Eagle's Nest fortress to reinforce Hewingham." The mention of the Eagle's Nest cavalry sent a ripple through the room. My expression chilled, a hint of disdain crossing my face. The Eagle's Nest, territory of Count Eisenberg, held only bitter memories for me. I had been exiled to this chaotic region precisely because I refused to align with Count Eisenberg's cowardly, corrupt ways. I had long since grown tired of that stagnant, bureaucratic environment. Boris, well aware of my history with the eagle's nest, noted the reaction. He knew this was the most difficult part of the appointment. I know you have had unpleasant dealings with the eagle's nest, Boris said, maintaining a firm tone. However, I require you to set aside personal grievances for the sake of the kingdom and the people. He leaned forward. The eagle's nest troops are hardened by war against the Solon tribe. They are the finest cavalry in the empire. They will be the sword that strikes down the corrupt and the bandits, ensuring our new policy succeeds. But a strong army needs a commander who can lead them. A general is hard to find. He raised his voice, formalizing the moment. Knight Friedrich von Schmidt. I instinctively straightened my back. Count Boris declared. I, Count Boris von Erhard, governor of the Three Borders, appoint you plenipotentiary envoy for bandit suppression in Hewingham and commander of the Eagle's Nest Fortress cavalry reinforcements. He presented the official commission. Effective immediately, you have full command over the 2,500 elite cavalry from Eagle's Nest and all loyal forces you have gathered and trained in the borderlands. I charge you to wield this imperial sword to integrate all available strength, crush those defying the crown and harming the people, expose the masterminds, and restore order to the Three Borders. Locking eyes with Friedrich, he added gravely, this is a monumental task. Knight Friedrich, can you shoulder this burden and fulfill the trust placed in you by the king and myself? In the silent barn, Friedrich stood, his imposing figure casting a long shadow. I recognized the weight of this opportunity. Personal grievances had to be set aside for the sake of the realm. Friedrich struck his breastplate, his voice ringing out like a drawn blade. I am honored by your trust, Governor. I will spare no effort to clear the land and restore peace to Hewingham. Good, Boris exclaimed, gripping Friedrich's arm. With your help, the bandits will be quelled and the borders secured. News of Count Boris's miraculous survival hit the corrupt bureaucrats and local tyrants like a slap in the face. Shock and disappointment quickly curdled into deep resentment. They blamed the meddlesome I, cursing the young knight in private. Damn that Schmidt boy! Why couldn't he stay in the borderlands instead of stirring up trouble in Hewingham? A monster who chases thousands with a few dozen cavalry. He ruined our plans. That old man Boris is truly lucky. Yet, they were somewhat relieved that the count seemed cowed by his near-death experience. He retreated to the governor's mansion in Hewingham, bringing his preliminary survey data with him. For a time, the governor kept a low profile, handling only routine matters. The land reform stalled in his absence, leading the old powers to misjudge the situation. They assumed the count was either terrified by the rebels or had finally learned to respect the local status quo. Emboldened, the local gentry, whose interests were threatened by the land distribution decree, began their counteroffensive. They moved to obstruct the implementation of the land policy. Local officials and village heads tasked with distributing land deeds faced unprecedented resistance. They were mocked, threatened by thugs, and in some cases, physically assaulted. Boundary markers were torn up and notices destroyed. Without the governor's direct presence, the local powers easily stifled the reform. Terrified peasants, fearing retribution, dared not claim the land deeds. Boris's hard-won survey data became nothing more than useless numbers. In the governor's war room, the atmosphere was suffocating. The room was cluttered with dossiers and maps, heavy with the scent of ink and dust. Count Boris stood silently before a detailed map. Red markings indicated over 200,000 qing of newly surveyed land, the foundation for future revival. A staffer reported bitterly, "My lord, the survey of the western and southern districts is complete, totaling over 203,400 qing of arable land. Yet, 10 days after the decree, not a single farmer dares register. Our village heads were assaulted and the boundary markers destroyed." Boris remained motionless, staring at the map. His calloused fingers traced the red zones, now effectively locked away by invisible chains. The report confirmed his worst fears. He never expected to seize the local elite's lifeline with just one survey and a decree. This was a coordinated, silent resistance designed to erode his authority through local control. Who was behind this? Boris asked calmly. The staffer lowered his voice. The resistance is led by Baron Albrecht of Wheatwave Castle. He controls western grain routes and colludes with foreign powers. Baron Glass of the Rhine River, who controls the gold sand mines and employs mercenaries, is also involved. They claim your land reform violates the benevolence of the gods and competes with the people for profit. Boris sneered, a high-sounding excuse indeed. He knew their game, wrapping naked greed in moral rhetoric to frame reform as tyranny. It was the oldest, most shameless tactic of the established elite. However, Boris did not fly into a rage or order immediate arrests. He knew that in the murky waters of Hewingham, raw anger would only isolate him further. Albrecht and Glass were merely pawns for a network that had dominated Hewingham for generations, likely with higher-level complicity. A direct confrontation would only force his enemies to unite more tightly. He needed a strategy to break the deadlock. Turning around, Boris looked as if he could see through the walls into the heart of Hewingham's power structure. He didn't need a storm, he needed a lever. The mud is not a solid block, Boris muttered. There are always roots seeking the sun, those dissatisfied with the status quo who would grasp at a chance for change. He considered the suppressed minor nobles, the ruined knights, and the idealistic low-level officials. Albrecht, Glass. He tapped the table, his eyes sharp. They are arrogant and greedy. Surely, they have enemies too. Do the commoners crushed under their heels truly wish to remain subservient forever? A clear plan began to take shape in my mind. I could not rely on top-down pressure alone. I had to exploit internal fissures, cultivate allies, and divide the enemy. I intended to stir the stagnant waters of Hewingham from within. Issue orders. Count Boris commanded his staff with calm resolve. First, monitor Albrecht and Glass closely. Gather concrete evidence of their collusion with foreign powers, smuggling, and extortion. Second, he continued sharply, secretly compile a list of local minor nobles, knights, and gentry who harbor grudges against them or have been suppressed despite their talents. Third, under the guise of military readiness, provide Friedrich's cavalry with additional supplies to intensify border patrols. The staff member bowed instantly. Understood, my lord. Boris looked at the map, knowing a bloodless yet perilous war had begun. This would be a battle of wits, intelligence, and resource reallocation. As an aging governor, he needed meticulous patience to break the ice of Hewingham. Days later, a vetted list of outcasts, talented individuals marginalized by the corrupt bureaucracy, was placed on my desk. The list contained outcasts struggling in Hwenham's mire, talented or useful individuals sidelined by the ruling bureaucratic elite due to their integrity, misfortune, or personal vendettas. Boris scanned the names, focusing on 3 in particular. Hans Miller, a low-level tax assistant in Wheatwave Castle earning 3 silver coins a month with no background. Known as an inflexible, petty official, he was ostracized for refusing to cook the books. Yet, he was meticulous and untainted by corruption, earning him respect among the commoners. Boris valued his stubborn adherence to rules and his suppressed ambition. I needed a sharp blade to cut through the financial black box. Gregor von Stauffenberg, a border patrol commander from a military family, whose father once served under Boris. A brave warrior, Gregor remained unpromoted due to his integrity and his refusal to bribe superiors, leaving his troops underpaid and without land. He was a warblade, desperate for resources to stabilize his men. Matthias Lang, a bard whose family estate was stolen by Baron Glass through forged debts, leading to his father's death. His poetry, often criticizing the corrupt, held influence among the lower classes. He was a soft blade, fueled by hatred and intimate knowledge of the elite's secrets. Boris summoned them via secret channels, ensuring their movements went unnoticed. Under the cover of night, the 3 were brought to a secure study in the governor's mansion. They felt immense pressure and excitement upon seeing the formidable count. When Gregor identified himself, Boris recalled his father, Gregor von Stauffenberg. Your father was one of my most loyal and brave deputies. To think his son is now merely a patrol commander? Boris asked with regret. Gregor, eyes reddening, knelt. I am incompetent, my lord. I have failed my father's name, trapped by this corrupt bureaucracy. Boris helped him up, sighing. It is not your incompetence, but the filth of Hewingham. I have brought you here to restore order. Boris turned to Hans Miller, his voice steady. Hans, you are a man of integrity. Hewingham is a festering wound that requires unconventional methods. Will you be my vanguard to audit these accounts and expose the parasites? If you succeed, I promise you the position of Minister of Finance. Hans looked up, trembling with disbelief at the prospect of such a high office. He knelt deeply. I will serve you until my death, my lord. Boris turned to Gregor. I know your troops' plight. A soldier without land is a soldier without loyalty. I will grant your unit 5,000 acres of prime land for a military colony. Gregor's eyes widened. This was enough to stabilize his entire force. But, Boris warned, you must train them into an elite force to act as a dagger against our enemies. Can you do it? I can. Gregor roared, kneeling again. I swear to forge a tiger wolf army for you. Finally, Boris addressed Matthias. I know of your family's tragedy. Glass's crimes are intolerable. I need you to use your intellect to gather evidence of their land grabbing and illegal activities. Succeed, and I will make you my chief advisor and reopen your family's case to ensure Glass pays in blood. Matthias wept, kneeling and touching his head to the floor. I will serve you, my lord, even if it costs me my life. Boris watched his 3 new blades with cold intensity. The counteroffensive had truly begun. Hans would clear the finances, Gregor would command the steel, and Matthias would dig the graves. The old commander finally identified the key pieces to turn the tide in this deadlocked game. The Shadow War in Hwenum had entered a new phase. In late August, as Count Boris struggled to navigate the complex power struggles of Hwenum, a battle-hardened cavalry unit arrived at the city outskirts. The force consisted of 2,500 men, each with 2 horses. Both riders and mounts wore standard-issue half-plate armor, worn and scarred from long service. The grim, lethal aura forged from years of bloody skirmishes against scarred nomadic tribes left the city guards and local populace stunned and silent. These were the Eaglenist cavalry, reinforcements sent by the Empress, not the elite Northern Iron Cavalry, but a seasoned force of veterans. Their arrival provided a much-needed morale boost to the gloomy city, easing the heavy burden on Count Boris's mind. With this mobile force, he felt significantly more confident in handling potential armed conflicts or local rebellions. Despite the governor's mansion's empty coffers due to corruption and war, Boris hosted a simple banquet to welcome the troops. The meal consisted of roasted horse meat, black bread, weak ale, and dried cheese, a rare hot meal for the weary soldiers. Attendees included Boris, the newly appointed Bandit Suppression Commissioner I, Sir Ludwig of the Eaglenist Cavalry, and senior officers. The atmosphere was restrained, maintaining military formality. Sir Ludwig, the commander, was a man in his 40s with a steady face and sharp eyes. Though not a high-profile figure in the Eaglenist hierarchy, he carried himself with dignity. Ludwig showed respect to Count Boris and clear deference to the silent, imposing me, stating, I have heard much of Knight Schmidt. I am honored to serve under your command to suppress the bandits. I nodded briefly. Thank you, Sir Ludwig. I look forward to our cooperation. Boris officially announced the Empress's decree. The Eaglenist cavalry would be under the direct command of me for the purpose of bandit suppression. To Boris's surprise, Ludwig accepted immediately, striking his chest. Understood. The Empress ordered me to follow Knight Friedrich's command without question. The compliance was suspicious, unlike the Empress's usual penchant for internal power struggles, but Boris accepted it as a stroke of luck. As the banquet relaxed, Ludwig set down his cup, looking troubled. Count, there is one more matter. The Ministry of War has owed us 6 months of military pay. The Empress assured us that you, a pillar of the nation, would find a way to settle this upon our arrival to ensure morale. The hall fell silent. The local officers looked down, avoiding eye contact. Boris's hand paused. He realized the Empress's generosity was a trap. She was using him to feed a hungry army without providing the funds, effectively turning the financial burden onto the impoverished Hwenum. This was a scheme to strengthen her military presence while shackling him with a fiscal crisis. If he failed to pay, the army might mutiny. If he taxed the people, he would incite the very unrest his enemies desired. It was a vicious political maneuver, but Boris could not show weakness. He suppressed his anger and smiled confidently. I understand. The Empress's concern for the troops is my concern. This will be handled. He declared, 3 days from now, on September 1st, gather the troops at the governor's mansion. I will personally distribute the full 6 months of back pay. Ludwig and his officers were relieved and bowed. Thank you, Count. We will fight to the death for you. The banquet continued with a superficial harmony. However, I, watching from the side, noticed the flicker of deep anxiety in Boris's eyes. I knew the state of the treasury. It was impossible to pay 2,500 elite cavalrymen with the current funds. Boris was gambling his reputation to buy time. After the banquet, I followed Boris to a private corridor. I asked in a low voice, "My lord, the military pay." Boris dropped his facade, revealing his exhaustion. "I know. We don't even have 1,000 silver coins. But we must keep them stable. We have 3 days to find a way." He looked at me. "This cavalry is the key to our new policy. We cannot let them turn on us. Keep them in check for these 3 days. I will find the money, even if I have to beg or borrow every last coin." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I knew the old commander was cornered and would likely resort to extreme measures. That night, Boris lay awake, unable to sleep. The moonlight cast shadows that mirrored his chaotic thoughts. The arrival of the cavalry was both a military asset and a financial catastrophe. 6 months of back pay was an astronomical sum. His public promise was now tied to his credibility and the safety of the entire region. Failure meant mutiny or total loss of control, yet the treasury was empty. Increasing taxes would only drive the populace toward rebellion. Borrowing from local elites like Albrecht or Glass was impossible. They would only wait for him to fail. Anxiety gnawed at him like a venomous snake. Bowles realized that in 3 days, the unpaid cavalry at the governor's mansion would turn from hopeful to furious, marking the end of his political career and life. In this desperate situation, Bowles frantically searched for any glimmer of hope. Suddenly, a name and a location flashed in his mind. The Rockefort Manor, located in the fertile Rhine River region of the Hohenem fief, known as the Pearl of Rhineland. Bowles recalled the estate from his review of Hohenem's files. It was one of the wealthiest areas in the Northern Territory, boasting fertile soil and abundant resources. Its owner, Count Rockefort, was currently the governor of the northern province in France City and a pillar of the kingdom's defense against the Solonians. Bowles held a degree of respect for the Count. The Count had stabilized the northern front and supported the rise of Confort. Under the young Lord I, Confort had become a rising star, a success story made possible by the Count's strategic vision and support. Bowles's secret investigations revealed that the Rockefort estate was one of the few that strictly followed kingdom law and refrained from seizing military colony land. Of course, given their wealth, they had no need for such meager land. This adherence to the law in a corrupt region reflected the Rockefort family's integrity and foresight. The Rockefort Manor, with generations of wealth, they must have massive reserves, Bowles thought, sitting up. The Count is away, and his steward is known for being law-abiding. Perhaps I can negotiate. A bold plan formed. He would request an emergency loan from the Rockefort estate to resolve his immediate crisis. While seemingly outlandish, the idea had merit. As the governor of the three borders, his authority was legitimate, and borrowing from local nobles in emergencies had precedence. The stability of Hohenem was vital to the security of the entire northern frontier. By helping Bowles stabilize the region, the Rockefort family would essentially be securing their own rear flank. He could offer future tax revenue or assets confiscated from local tyrants as collateral. Given the family's reputation, dealing with them was less risky than negotiating with the local corrupt gentry. The risk was high. If rejected or exposed, his authority would be shattered. Furthermore, borrowing from a powerful governor's private estate was politically sensitive. Yet, with no other options, Bowles decided he had to try. His resolve hardened. At dawn the next day, Bowles awoke, his eyes bloodshot but his spirit firm. He knew the mission had to be kept secret. He summoned a trusted guard. "Take my seal and ride to the Rockefort Manor in Rhineland immediately. Tell the steward that Governor Bowles von Herrick's requests an urgent meeting regarding the defense of Wenham. He kept the reason vague to maintain importance without revealing his desperation. Once the messenger left, Bowles prepared himself. Dressed in plain clothes with only 4 guards, he left the governor's mansion in an unmarked carriage toward the west. He needed to avoid the eyes of corrupt officials and local spies. As the carriage sped through the morning mist, Bowles sat in deep contemplation. The success of this trip was critical. He mentally rehearsed his arguments, balancing the need for the loan with the dignity of his office. Anxiety and determination warred within him as he approached the Rochefort Manor, where the morning sun bathed the gardens in light. Charlotte, holding her infant son Klein, was walking in the garden with her maid. The baby laughed, providing a rare moment of peace for Charlotte. This tranquility was soon interrupted. The elderly steward, Hermann, approached with a grave expression, led by the maid Martha. "My lady." The steward bowed respectfully. "A messenger from the new governor, Bowles von Herrick's, has arrived. He requests an urgent meeting today regarding Wenham's defense. I dare not decide on my own." Charlotte's heart sank, and she tightened her grip on her son. The governor of the 3 borders? She knew of him as a veteran tasked with reforming the chaotic Wenham. Why would he visit the manor personally? She realized her father was away in France City, leaving the estate under the steward's care. However, matters of defense were far beyond a steward's authority. The steward could not represent the Rochefort family in such a high-level matter. Only Charlotte had the standing to receive the governor in her father's absence. Though she felt a flicker of panic, she forced herself to remain calm. She was a daughter of the Rochefort family and could not show weakness. She handed Klein to Martha, her voice steady and decisive. "Martha, Jenny, please take Klein to the nursery." She turned to the steward. "Hermann, inform the governor's messenger that the Rochefort Manor welcomes him. Prepare the reception room with the appropriate etiquette, but keep it discreet. I will be there shortly." "Yes, my lady," the steward replied, relieved by her composure, and hurried away. Charlotte stood alone, clenching her fists. Despite her youth, her face showed a resolve beyond her years. She did not know why the governor had come, but she was prepared to protect her father's land. Perhaps this was a chance to learn more about the outside world, especially news of the person far away in Confort. The thought made her heart race. She turned and walked toward the main castle building to change into formal attire for her mysterious, high-ranking guest. Count Boris's carriage entered Rochefort Manor through the sturdy iron gates, guided by well-trained guards. The orderly fields and healthy farmers stood in stark contrast to the famine and decay seen elsewhere in Hewingham. Boris marveled at the Rochefort family's governance, feeling more confident about his request for a loan. Led by a servant, Boris entered a spacious, bright reception room in the main building. The room was decorated with understated, practical elegance, featuring the Rochefort griffin crest above the fireplace. 2 people waited, a meticulous middle-aged butler and a young woman in the main armchair. Boris's gaze sharpened as he focused on the young woman. She had short, golden hair and a soft yet defined face. Despite a hint of exhaustion, her blue eyes were sharp and deep, like ice under a winter sky. Dressed in a tailored dark blue riding outfit, she appeared both capable and elegant. Her mere presence commanded attention. The butler bowed and introduced her. "Governor, this is Charlotte de Rochefort, daughter of Count Rochefort and a knight." Boris realized with a start. She was the genius daughter of Count Rochefort, the youngest female Tier 2 knight in the kingdom. He realized that for such a significant military and political matter, only this high-ranking lady could negotiate on behalf of the family. Her presence actually simplified things. Boris quickly composed himself, feigning surprise and respect. "Knight Charlotte, I have long heard of your reputation as the kingdom's youngest female Tier 2 knight. It is an honor." Charlotte stood, returned a standard knight's salute with fluid grace, and said calmly, "You are too kind, Governor. Please sit." She gestured to a seat. The butler withdrew and closed the door. With only Boris, Charlotte, and a few attendants left, the atmosphere grew heavy. After tea was served, Charlotte looked directly at Boris. "Governor, you have come a long way. What is your business?" Appreciating her directness, Boris decided to be honest. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from casual to anxious and sincere. "Knight Charlotte, I will not mince words," Boris said, his voice raspy with fatigue. "I am here to beg for help. I need to borrow a large sum of money and grain from your estate to save Hewingham from an immediate crisis." Charlotte's brow twitched, but she remained calm, signaling him to continue. Her composure impressed Boris further. Boris sighed, describing the hellish state of Hewingham, Brittany, and the Rhine River regions. Towns are empty, fields are barren, and corpses litter the roads, scavenged by wild dogs. It is a mix of natural disaster and human greed, corrupt officials and local tyrants exploiting the people. Refugees have turned to banditry, and the local garrison is weak or even complicit. Boris clenched his fists. "I came here to reform the land and laws, but the resistance is immense." To make matters worse, the Empress sent 2,000 elite cavalry from Eglinus to help me quell the unrest. However, the kingdom is broke. These troops haven't been paid in 6 months, and the Empress ordered me to find the funds locally. If I cannot pay these soldiers, they will turn on me. Hewingham will fall into total chaos. Boris stared at Charlotte, desperate. "I am at my wit's end. The local tyrants will not help. The only family with the wealth and integrity to help is the Rochefort family." He stood and bowed deeply. "Knight Charlotte, I know this is a heavy request, but it is for the sake of hundreds of thousands of lives. If Hewingham falls, the war will eventually reach your doorstep. Please help us. I pledge my family honor and my authority as governor that this loan will be repaid from future taxes and confiscated assets." Boris had laid out the tragedy, his dilemma, and the mutual interest clearly. He waited for her response. He knew the fate of Hewingham rested in her hands. Charlotte remained silent, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. The room was silent, save for the crackling fireplace. The pressure was immense. Boris's plea weighed heavily on Charlotte's heart. The silence in the room became suffocating. Charlotte looked down at her hands, her fingertips pale. Though she had lived in the manor, she was not naive. Having served as a cavalry captain in France City, she had seen the scars of war and heard the stories of the suffering in Hewingham. She hadn't realized the situation had become this dire. Deep pity and anger stirred within her. She loved this land and its people. Her heart tightened for the innocent people struggling to survive. Boris had forced her to confront the bloody reality outside her peaceful walls. However, providing such massive aid was no small matter. It required a significant investment of real wealth. The amount Boris requested could drain generations of the Rochefort family's savings and influence the regional balance of power. The burden of this decision now rested entirely on her shoulders. With her father defending the Northern Territory and I fighting the Salonians at Conford, Charlotte stood as the Rochefort family's sole authority, forced to make a decision alone. "My words could dictate the flow of thousands of gold coins, stabilize an army, and shift the fate of the entire northern frontier," she realized. The unprecedented pressure left her feeling suffocated, as if the very air had thickened. She wondered if her father felt this same crushing weight when facing the Solon army at France City. Did I, struggling against overwhelming odds at Conford, also spend sleepless nights agonizing over the consequences of my decisions? The cold, heavy reality of power pressed down upon her heart for the first time. She looked up, her blue eyes meeting those of Count Boris. The old governor watched her silently, his weathered eyes devoid of official authority, revealing only exhaustion, anxiety, and a desperate, sincere hope. His gray hair, deep wrinkles, and weary posture spoke volumes of his dire situation. Charlotte recalled the rumors surrounding the old marshal. Bols von Herix was a veteran who had defended the northern frontier decades ago by repelling the Skarn nomadic tribes. Though she hadn't witnessed it, the glory of that campaign was legendary in family records and bardic songs. He was a man renowned for his courage, loyalty, and patriotism. Why would a man who could have retired in the royal capital risk his reputation to beg a junior for help, if not for a genuine desire to serve the people? Trust began to sprout amidst her scrutiny. Time stretched, each second feeling agonizingly long. Boris, his staff, and even the servants held their breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. Finally, Charlotte took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. The hesitation in her eyes vanished, replaced by the clear, decisive gaze of a knight. She stood tall and met Boris's eyes, her voice steady and commanding. "Count Boris." Boris straightened, his spirits lifting. Charlotte continued. "The suffering in Huenum is heartbreaking. Stabilizing the border and protecting the people is a duty the Rockefort family cannot ignore. Rockefort Manor will lend you the military pay and supplies you require." Boris stood up, his lips trembling with disbelief and joy. "Knight Charlotte. You mean?" "However," Charlotte raised a hand, "I have 3 conditions." "Speak." "Even if it were 30, I would not refuse." Boris exclaimed. Charlotte held up one finger. "First, my steward will audit the loan and grain amounts with your staff, and we will sign a formal contract with clear repayment terms. You may use Huenum's tax revenue for the next 3 years as collateral, but the central government must guarantee the debt if taxes fall short." "Agreed. I accept completely," Boris nodded, relieved by her professionalism. Charlotte held up a second finger. "Second, these funds must be used exclusively for the Eagle's Nest Cavalry's pay, rations, and disaster relief. I will send supervisors. If any funds are embezzled, the Rockefort family will terminate aid and pursue legal action." "Rest assured," Boris declared, "this is a matter of life and death. If there is any failure, I will offer my own head." Charlotte held up a third finger. "Third, I require your guarantee that in suppressing the bandits and reforming the administration, you will protect innocent civilians from the ravages of war." Boris was stunned, then looked at her with profound appreciation. He gave a formal military salute. "I, Bols von Herix, swear upon my honor as a knight to restore peace to Huenum. May I be forsaken by gods and men if I break this oath." "Good," Charlotte smiled, relieved. "Please wait while I summon my steward to finalize the details. We will prepare the granaries and vaults immediately. I cannot thank you enough." Boris bowed deeply, his voice choked with emotion. "The people of Huenum will never forget this." Charlotte stepped aside, saying calmly, "Let us hope for a swift restoration of peace. Please, join me for tea while the staff handles the logistics." She led the invigorated Count toward the side parlor. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting a warm, resolute glow upon her golden hair and straight back. From the parlor's arched window, Boris looked down at the courtyard. His staff and the Rockefort steward were already hunched over ledgers and abacuses, negotiating the terms of the loan. Seeing this, Boris felt a surge of relief mixed with profound emotion. It was truly happening. A young noblewoman had resolved the crisis that had nearly driven him to ruin. He had expected rejection or harsh demands. Yet, his reason quickly tempered his joy. He knew this was merely the first, simplest step. The real challenge lay ahead. He had to effectively deploy the Eagle's Nest Cavalry, eradicate the elusive bandits, and restore production. More importantly, he had to extract wealth from corrupt officials and local tyrants to fill the treasury and repay the Rockeforts while implementing his new policy. Failure to improve Huenum's finances meant defaulting on the loan. Losing the Rockeforts' support would be the least of his worries. His enemies would tear him apart like sharks at the first sign of weakness. His fate would be no better than his predecessors. Boris's brow furrowed. The path ahead remained treacherous, and a single misstep could lead to total destruction. "Count," Charlotte interrupted, gesturing toward the busy steward and aides outside. "Hermann is a professional. With my scribe's help, the details will be handled perfectly." A maid silently served tea and refreshments. Once seated, Count Boris expressed his sincere gratitude. "Charlotte, your help today is a godsend. I truly don't know how to thank you and the Rockefort family." Charlotte sipped her tea. "No need for thanks, Count. A stable Hewingham ensures a peaceful Rhineland and a secure northern frontier. It is in the Rockefort family's interest to support the kingdom." She set her cup down, her blue eyes sharp. "If I may ask, beyond your 2,500 Eaglenist cavalry, how many loyal, capable infantry do you actually command?" Boris was taken aback, not by the intrusion, but by a young woman's direct grasp of military logistics. It was clear she possessed strategic insight far beyond that of a typical noblewoman. He recovered quickly, admitting with a sigh, "To be frank, I am new here. The local garrison is rotten, infiltrated by local strongmen and untrustworthy." Between the veterans Friedrich gathered at the border and a few loyal officers' men, I have barely 3,000 infantry. Their pay, equipment, and the land grants they crave remain unresolved, he admitted, trusting her with his vulnerabilities. Charlotte tapped her cup, then offered a proposal that made Boris's heart skip. If you trust me, I can assist with recruiting and training your infantry. Oh, Boris leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. Please, elaborate. I served as a cavalry captain in France City, fought the Salonians, and am a Tier 2 knight, she stated calmly. Her tone carried an undeniable weight of authority. More importantly, she continued, looking toward the fertile Rhineland fields, the Rochefort family holds significant influence here. Many of these young men grew up on our land. They are strong, loyal, and eager to prove themselves. They only farm because Hewingham has been too chaotic for military service. Her eyes sparkled with a new vision. If I recruit in the Rochefort name, backed by the governor's official pay and promises of land grants for merit, I can build a loyal, high-morale force. Boris was electrified. This solved his greatest headache. A core infantry force backed by Rochefort prestige and led by a veteran Tier 2 knight would far surpass his current, corrupt troops. Charlotte, Boris exclaimed, nearly knocking over his tea. If you can do this, it is a massive boon. It would be like adding wings to a tiger. Charlotte remained composed. This is a preliminary idea. We must discuss the logistics, troop numbers, and formal authorization. Authorized. Everything is negotiable, Boris insisted. I will prioritize funding this new army. As for the land, his eyes glinted sharply. We shall seize it from the corrupt local gentry and grant it to our soldiers in the name of the kingdom. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a desperate loan negotiation to a vibrant, strategic partnership. What began as a financial fix had blossomed into a constructive alliance. Boris envisioned a new army of Rhinelanders led by the Rochefort heiress. This was more than military strength. He had found a powerful, reliable ally in Hewingham. After 2 hours of negotiation, they agreed that Rochefort Manor would provide the grain and pay in 2 secret shipments. The first shipment would arrive tonight, transported by the manor's most trusted guards to a secret drop-off point. The second would follow tomorrow night to avoid detection by hostile factions. Boris left his aide to finalize the contracts with Hermann. He thanked Charlotte once more and departed, feeling a mix of excitement and the heavy weight of his new responsibility. Charlotte watched him leave, then walked alone to the second-floor stone balcony. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the terrace. She watched Boris's carriage disappear down the tree-lined path until the sound of wheels faded into the wind. The manor returned to silence, but Charlotte's mind was racing. Her decision to help wasn't just about pity or the kingdom. It was driven by a deeper, sharper personal need. A crisis of identity and a desperate hunger for self-reliance burned within her. The meeting with Boris had acted as a mirror, revealing her precarious position. She realized she had become too dependent on me, both emotionally and in status. Since leaving the military to play the role of a mother in this secluded manor, her life had centered entirely on waiting and domesticity. While she loved her time with Klein, it wasn't enough for the woman who had once commanded cavalry on the northern frontier. She craved power, not just martial strength, but the ability to control her own destiny. She realized that if she remained in this protected state, her security would always be tied to me and my distant promises. The thought made her feel weak and uneasy. The recurring nightmare of me with another woman haunted her like a thorn. She feared it was a premonition of her own lack of value. She refused to become a pathetic, weeping victim of betrayal. I must become strong, she whispered, gripping the cold stone railing. Not just for the Count or Hewingham, but for myself. Returning to the military was the most familiar path. Recruiting and training soldiers would allow her to reclaim the feeling of command and responsibility. It would keep her busy, leaving no room for idle longing or groundless fears. Filling her life with duty would silence the emptiness within. And if the worst were to happen, if I truly abandoned her in Klein, she would be ready to stand on her own. With a loyal army, the Rochefort family's support, and her own strength, Charlotte de Rochefort could return here with her child, living securely and even prospering. She needed no one's pity. She could protect her child and home herself, turning her back on that faithless man forever. This thought brought a mix of defiant, self-punishing satisfaction and sharp heartache. It was a tragic end she dreaded, for she still loved him. The prospect of becoming strangers or enemies with me felt like an invisible hand crushing her heart. The warm sunlight failed to dispel the chill in her soul as her desire for independence clashed with her longing for affection. Just as these agonizing thoughts threatened to overwhelm her, a cry rang out. A loud, indignant wail came from the nursery, followed by Aunt Martha's soothing voice. "Oh, hush, little Klein, don't cry. Mother is coming. Are you hungry?" The sound acted like magic, snapping Charlotte out of her heavy ruminations on betrayal and independence. She shuddered, her complex emotions replaced by a soft, instinctive urgency. She turned immediately, ignoring her disheveled hair, and hurried toward the sound. All her grand ambitions and anxieties vanished, replaced by the primal pull of motherhood. In that moment, she was simply Klein's mother. The small life needing her care was her only true, inescapable responsibility. The breeze on the balcony remained gentle, and the sun stayed warm. Early September sunlight bathed the plaza before the Huenum governor's mansion. The atmosphere was charged with excitement, anticipation, and the lethal aura of steel. In the center, 2,500 cavalrymen from Eglinist stood in formation. Men and horses were clad in battle-worn but gleaming armor, spears bristling like a forest. Having heard they would finally receive 6 months of back pay, these veterans looked at their commander with newfound recognition and hope. They stood silent, save for the occasional clatter of hooves, heightening the solemnity. The plaza was packed with the governor's personal guards and curious townspeople. The crowd watched the formidable guest army with a mix of awe, expectation, and subtle fear. As the hour struck, the mansion gates opened. Count Boris, in his blue governor's uniform, stepped onto the platform flanked by Friedrich and Sir Ludwig. His weathered, resolute face commanded immediate respect. Scanning the crowd, he raised a document sealed with the governor's seal and declared, "Soldiers of the Eglinist Cavalry, I, Bols von Herix, Governor of the Three Borders, am here by the king's command. You have served with distinction, yet the kingdom's financial struggles have left your pay 6 months in arrears, a failure of the state, not of your service." His tone of understanding moved many veterans. However, Bowles continued, his voice rising, "The king and queen mother are mindful of your hardship. I will not stand by while you suffer." He waved the document, shouting, "Today, I authorize the full payment of your 6 months' back pay from the Huenum treasury. It shall be distributed immediately." A roar erupted. The plaza exploded into cheers. The soldiers, though disciplined, could not hide their ecstasy, their hands trembling as they gripped their weapons. This pay meant dignity, sustenance for their families, and a future. Scribes and quartermasters brought out chests filled with silver coins that shimmered in the sun. The soldiers lined up to sign for their long-awaited wages. The process was efficient, reflecting the competence of Bowles's administration. Sir Ludwig stepped forward, accepting the receipt for the total sum, and declared, "On behalf of the Eglinist Cavalry, I thank you, Governor. You keep your word. From this day, the Eglinist Cavalry is your blade. We await your command. We await your command." 2,500 cavalrymen roared in unison, shaking the windows of the surrounding buildings. The display of morale unsettled the onlookers and those watching from the shadows. Bowles nodded, signaling for silence. He turned to Friedrich and announced, "To eradicate the bandits, I appoint Friedrich von Schmidt as the Bandit Suppression Commissioner. All military operations, including the Eglinist Cavalry and new recruits, are under his command." Friedrich stepped forward, eyes sharp, and accepted the order. "I accept. I shall clear the land of this scourge." Bowles then announced, "To bolster our forces, I am establishing the Rhineland Regiment, 1,500 strong, to garrison the Rhineland and protect our people. I appoint Charlotte de Rochefort as Deputy Bandit Suppression Commissioner and Commander of the Rhineland Regiment." This order officially integrated Charlotte and her future troops into the Huenum military structure. The news caused a stir. The soldiers were curious, while locals grasped the significance of the young knight and the Rochefort family. With the orders delivered, Bowles stepped to the edge of the platform, knowing the time for his true declaration had arrived. His voice boomed like thunder, reaching every corner of the plaza and the ears of the local elite. Soldiers, citizens of Huenum. Without order, there is no peace. I have come not for status, but to suppress the bandits and restore the rule of law. With supplies secured and troops ready, I declare, the campaign to purge the bandits begins today. Bowles's gaze turned icy, targeting the spies in the crowd. This is a campaign against bandits. But if anyone dares to obstruct the new policy, harbor rebels, or exploit the people, be they wealthy gentry or officials, my sword will strike them down as surely as it strikes the bandits. He drew his sword, the blade flashing in the sun. My word is law. Do not say you were not warned. Bowles's speech at the square was a chilling declaration of intent. By combining military might with a clear warning to the old guard, he established his rule in Huenum. Those who submit prosper, and those who resist perish. He dropped all pretenses, abandoning his previous caution. Bowles made it clear he was here to upend the status quo. With troops and supplies secured, he intended to use the bandits as a bloody stepping stone to establish his absolute authority. He sneered internally at the corrupt officials and local gentry who were watching from the shadows. Once he returned victorious, he would force them to surrender their ill-gotten gains or face the same fate as the bandits he was about to crush. If I die in Huenum, so be it, Bowles thought, resolute. The Queen Mother won't argue with a corpse. In mid-September, the Imperial Council met in the tense, solemn throne room of Place. Young King Sigmund I sat on the throne, gripping the armrests nervously. Behind a beaded curtain sat Queen Mother Catherine, the true power behind the throne. The court was filled with officials, yet the atmosphere was thick with agitation. The tension centered on one man, Count Bowles von Herix, the governor of the three borders. All eyes, overt or hidden, fixed on the few officials who had just stepped forward to speak with intense fervor. The focus of the court was the governor of the three borders, Count Boris von Herix, who was currently appending Huenum 1,000 miles away. A pale, sharp-tongued official stepped forward to impeach Bowles, accusing him of gross misconduct. He cited Bowles's land reforms in Huenum and Brittany as disruptive and a waste of resources. He further accused Bowles of seizing land under the guise of returning state property to enrich his own faction. He criticized Bowles for placing the elite cavalry from Eglinist under the command of an unknown knight, Friedrich Schmidt. Finally, he condemned Bowles for appointing Charlotte, daughter of Count Rochefort, as his deputy and allowing her to recruit troops. The officials' well-prepared accusations were designed to lead to Bowles's execution. Several other officials joined the chorus, demanding Bowles be replaced. They represented the local interests Bowles had threatened. Bowles's reforms had triggered a backlash at the highest levels of power. Queen Mother Catherine listened silently, her fingers tapping rhythmically. Young King Sigmund, feeling the pressure, looked to the curtain for guidance. Seeing no reaction from his mother, he grew increasingly anxious. Recalling his lessons, he spoke with forced composure, acknowledging the complaints. The Count was appointed by us to quell the rebellion, Sigmund said. Let us focus on the bandits first. Administrative matters can wait. The officials seized on the king's call for a swift battle, hoping to force Bowles into a fatal blunder. The accuser agreed, feigning loyalty to the king's wisdom. He argued that Bowles's slow progress proved he was stalling and hoarding power. He demanded an imperial decree ordering Bowles to engage the main bandit force immediately or face dismissal. The court erupted in calls for an immediate offensive. Their plan was malicious. They knew the terrain and the bandit strength made a hasty attack suicidal. They hoped to force Bowles into a trap where he would be killed or disgraced. They cared nothing for the rebellion. They only wanted to restore their old control. This golden medal of forced engagement was a classic tool to destroy loyal generals. Behind the curtain, Catherine smirked. She saw through their schemes perfectly. An elderly, neutral official from the Privy Council stepped forward. He suggested a more cautious approach, advising Bowles to clear small groups before attempting a decisive battle. His words briefly tempered the room's hostility. Catherine finally spoke, her voice cutting through the noise. The king is right. The priority is ending the rebellion. She defended Bowles, noting that his reforms were necessary to stabilize the region and secure supplies. She then issued her decision. The room fell silent. She ordered Bowles to prioritize the campaign, granting him full discretionary power while demanding regular reports. The decree was carefully worded, leaving Bowles with significant tactical freedom. By emphasizing discretionary power, she effectively handed the decision-making back to Bowles. This satisfied the Hawks while ensuring Bowles wasn't hamstrung. As for other matters, she added coldly, they will be addressed after the rebellion. I will not tolerate any interference or sabotage during this crisis. Her final warning silenced the room. The officials realized their attempt to use the court to destroy Bowles had failed. They recognized that the Queen Mother was a far more formidable strategist than they had assumed. Her support for Bowles signaled her firm intent to eradicate the rot in the three borders. As the morning assembly neared its end, a quiet minister stepped forward, shifting the focus from Hewingham to a far more lethal threat. The speaker was Count William, Minister of Livelihood, known for his pragmatism and intelligence network. With a grave expression, he addressed the hall. Your Majesty, Queen Mother, colleagues, while the banditry is concerning, a matter of national survival demands our immediate attention. All eyes turned to him, and Queen Mother Katerina sat upright behind her screen. Count William dropped his bombshell. My merchant leader, Blake, who holds a trade permit for the Northern Territory and the Scarn tribe, has sent an urgent report. The Solon army is amassing in force outside Blackstone Pass and Wharton's Castle. Their numbers far exceed any previous autumn raids. A gasp rippled through the hall. Blackstone Pass and Wharton's Castle were the kingdom's northern gateways. William continued, his voice chilling. Blake's informants report that the Solonians have mobilized vast tribal cavalry, driven a massive slave force, and constructed siege engines. This is no mere raid. Their target is the royal capital, Play City. The hall erupted in disbelief and panic at the mention of siege engines and an assault on the capital. Officials who had been bickering over Hewingham now turned pale, haunted by memories of the previous year's devastating invasion. If the Solonians truly intended to lay siege to the capital, it would mean total annihilation. The nobility realized their lives, wealth, and the very existence of the Plantagenet kingdom were at stake. Even Queen Mother Katerina leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped her chair, clearly blindsided by the news. Count William, she demanded, is this source reliable? Has the Ministry of War received reports? The Minister of War, a grizzled veteran, stepped forward. Your Majesty, the reports align with urgent dispatches from the Northern Front. 3 days ago, Count Rockefort and Count Eisenberg reported intense skirmishes between our scouts and elite Solon cavalry at Blackstone Pass and Wharton's Castle. We have suffered heavy losses. The enemy's movements are clearly a large-scale mobilization. While we lack definitive proof of siege engines, the probability is extremely high. The minister's confirmation turned the hall into a scene of chaotic terror. As the kingdom's survival hung in the balance, the Queen Mother's aide shouted for silence. Katerina stood, her presence commanding the room. She had regained her composure, her eyes sharper than before. Enough, she commanded, her voice icy. We will not succumb to panic. She scanned the room. We must assume the worst. The Solonians seek our destruction. We must prepare accordingly. She began issuing rapid-fire orders. Count William, I am here, Your Majesty. Coordinate all grain reserves. Seize and stockpile supplies, medicine, and fuel. Prioritize the capital's defense. Implement wartime rationing and punish any hoarding with death. As you command, William bowed. Minister of War. Present. Order Counts Rockefort and Eisenberg to hold the fortresses and delay the enemy at all costs to buy time for the capital. Issue a national mobilization order. Every lord must lead their knights and levies to Play City immediately. Any delay will be treated as treason. Understood, the minister bellowed. Finance and Interior ministers, assist with logistics and civil defense. Any negligence will be punished by the execution of your entire clan. We obey, the ministers replied, trembling. The Queen Mother's decisive actions replaced the panic with a grim, martial resolve. This is a war for our survival. Put aside your petty grievances and unite. Dismissed. The officials scrambled to carry out their orders. That night, The suffocating tension of the council followed Count William home. The sound of his carriage wheels on the cobblestones felt like a countdown. He arrived at his stone villa in the heart of the capital. Ignoring his family, he retreated directly to his study. He barely touched his dinner, using the excuse of urgent state business to escape his family's concern. He shut the heavy oak door of his study, leaving it slightly ajar. He collapsed into his chair, drained of all strength. In the darkness, he gripped the armrests, waiting in agony. Time crawled by. Finally, 3 rhythmic knocks sounded at the door. William straightened, forcing a steady voice. "Enter." A servant entered with a tray of tea. "Sir, your wife sent this tea to help you rest." William's heart hammered. He bolted to the door, checked the hallway, and slammed and bolted it shut. He leaned against the door, sweating and trembling. He whispered to the servant, "I did as Blake asked. I reported it at the meeting." The Queen Mother believed it. She's already ordered the mobilization of the capital's defenses and supplies. This servant stood tall, his humble facade vanishing, replaced by a cold, mocking smile of superiority. Ignoring Count William's report, I walked to the desk and sat in the Count's chair, acting as if I were the master of the manor. I sipped my tea, then looked at the trembling Count with a tone of approval. "Minister William, excellent work. I knew you would handle this well." Count William forced a pained smile, leaning forward to plead. "And my son? You promised." I set down my cup, speaking slowly. "Rest assured, Minister. Your little treasure and his charming mother, your mistress, are perfectly fine. They are safe. Tomorrow, you will receive a drawing from your son. You will accidentally find it, giving you a reason to leave the city and visit them." Hearing this, the Count's tension broke. He exhaled in relief, his legs giving way until he gripped the bookshelf for support. He murmured, "Thank you. Thank you." I chuckled coldly. "We should thank you. Lord Harold, the great chieftain, never forgets those who serve him. When the Solon army conquers Place City, a pragmatic man like you will not only save his family, but perhaps secure a higher post, like Minister of Finance. Far better than worrying about grain and coin, isn't it?" The threat and temptation stung the Count, leaving him pale. He had betrayed his king and country, sacrificing his people, all to protect an illegitimate son and a forbidden love. He had lost faith in the crumbling kingdom. It was better to serve a new master while he still held value. I stood, brushed off my clothes, and resumed my humble servant persona, though my eyes remained cold. "Your tea is getting cold, Minister. I must attend to other matters." Without another glance, I slipped out like a ghost, closing the door softly. Silence returned to the study, leaving the Count gasping for air against the bookshelf. The tea, once a symbol of his wife's care, now felt like poison. Late September, Conford territory. The golden autumn sun bathed Conford, a land once scarred by war, now vibrant and fertile. The region around the main city was orderly and thriving. Barren fields had been transformed into well-planned, crisscrossing farmland. Golden wheat swayed in the breeze, promising a bountiful harvest. Farmers worked the fields, their faces reflecting sweat and hope. Over 20 fortified settlements, Tunbeo, were scattered strategically across the territory. These were no longer makeshift camps, but permanent settlements built to Edgar's standardized designs. Each featured sturdy stone and wood barracks, granaries, armories, wells, schools, and clinics. These settlements expanded Conford's control, housing over 30,000 people and forming the bedrock of its stability. Development in the newly opened Southwest Peninsula was equally rapid. 3 large settlements were already taking shape along the coast and rivers. While many lived in temporary housing, administrative halls, and warehouses were built of stone, signaling a long-term commitment. The rigid Baojia system had been replaced by Edgar's more efficient, development-oriented administrative hierarchy. Young, loyal officials trained by Edgar were dispatched to manage these new villages. Though inexperienced, they were diligent, enforcing the Lord's laws and regulations to organize production and resolve disputes. Land reclamation surged, fueled by government-provided seeds, tools, and a 3-year tax exemption. Northwest of the main city, a lush valley was designated as the North Wind Horse Farm. Captured Solon warhorses and traded mares were being bred and trained by veterans. These hardy, Northern-bred horses were the foundation of Conford's future cavalry. The farm marked a critical step toward military self-sufficiency. Meanwhile, Winter's Port in the south was bustling again. Unlike the naval-focused Amber Bay, Winter's Port was positioned as a commercial hub with deep water access. Leveraging experience from Amber Bay, the port's reconstruction exceeded expectations. Docks were reinforced, warehouses and exchanges rose, and the lighthouse was relit. Dozens of merchant ships from field territory and beyond filled the harbor. Porters loaded timber, furs, and minerals, while unloading grain, cloth, books, and luxury goods. The noise of trade signaled the return of prosperity, making the port a vital gateway for resources. This Pearl of the North had survived the war, polished by the leader's vision and the people's hard work. It had become an undeniable beacon of stability and strength in the chaotic north. On the sunny docks of Winter's Port, the sea breeze carried the scent of salt. The Southern Cross, a large merchant ship bearing the Schmidt family's lion crest, sat at the deepest berth. Sailors loaded fine furs, gems, and minerals, while unloading Southern fabrics, spices, and books. Today's mission, however, was to escort a guest, Lady Irene, mistress of the Schmidt family. A warm farewell took place on the docks. Lady Irene, in a dark travel cloak, smiled at me and Princess Louise, while maids waited nearby with luggage. "Carl," Lady Irene said, adjusting my collar with pride and affection. "Seeing Conford thriving, the harvests, the port, the peace, and your reliable army, I am truly at ease." "Your father would be so proud," Anna said, her voice firm yet relieved. Having lived here for a year, she had witnessed her son transform from a young heir into a capable lord who commanded the respect of his subjects and the fear of his enemies. The northern frontier's harsh winters were taking a toll on her, making a return to the milder southern family estates a necessary choice. Turning to Princess Louise, Anna smiled warmly and took her hand. "With you here, kind and wise, I no longer worry about me being lonely. You have brought such life and warmth to this castle." I felt a surge of reluctance and gratitude toward my mother. I hugged her, whispering, "Thank you for your support, Mother. Take care on your journey south. I have everything under control here, do not worry." Louise also embraced Lady Irene, adding softly, "Safe travels, my lady. We will miss you." Lady Irene pulled back, her gaze lingering on the couple with a knowing, meaningful smile. Lowering her voice so only they could hear, she said, "Carl, Princess, it makes me so happy to see you two together." She paused, hinting, "But look at how Conford is growing. The castle is becoming grand, yet it still lacks the bustle of a true home." With a loving look, she added, "Perhaps you should consider adding a little one to the family? A child would bring so much joy and hope." Her tone turned serious. "Furthermore, Carl, as a lord, you face constant danger. A clear heir would not only complete your family, but also reassure your loyal soldiers. Knowing the banner of Conford has a successor gives their loyalty a solid foundation, which is vital for stability." I instinctively turned to look at Louise, feeling a sudden, flustered panic. The princess's face had turned bright red, the blush spreading to her ears and neck like a ripe cherry. She bowed her head, twisting her skirt tightly, betraying her inner turmoil. I noticed that while she was shy, her lips were not set in anger. Her trembling lashes revealed a pure, maidenly bashfulness. A strange mix of surprise and secret joy stirred in my heart. Does she feel the same? Is she willing to bear my child? I immediately chided myself for the foolish thought. Reflecting on the past 6 months, her worry during my campaign, and her growing intimacy, it was clear my wife had developed genuine feelings for me. I had simply been too trapped by my complicated feelings for Charlotte to acknowledge what was right in front of me. Yet, the memory of Charlotte and Edgar's words cast a shadow over my warmth. Is this the right time? How do I explain my tangled emotions? I realized this required careful thought. Regaining my composure, I forced a natural smile at my mother. "Mother, you are right. I understand. Don't worry. We will try." I intended to ease the tension and reassure her. However, the phrase "we will try," paired with my awkward expression, sounded unintentionally suggestive. Lady Irene chuckled, covering her mouth, her eyes crinkling with amusement as she looked between the two. Beside me, Louise looked as if she were about to combust. Her face and neck were a deep, blood-red hue. She was mortified, hanging her head so low her ears glowed. Realizing my blunder, I felt my own face heat up, awkwardly rubbing my cheek, unsure how to fix the situation. Seeing their adorable, flustered state, Lady Irene decided to stop teasing. All right. I understand. Good luck to you both. It is time. I must board. Take care of each other." With that, Lady Irene turned and stepped onto the gangplank of the Southern Cross. She waved goodbye from the deck. I and Louise stood on the pier, watching the ship raise its sails and vanish into the horizon. After the carriage departed, I and Louise walked back to the main castle in silence. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, but the air between them remained heavy with the awkwardness of my mother's parting words. The topic of an heir had stirred ripples in both their hearts. Louise's blush lingered as she stared at her shoes, her heart racing. I looked ahead, my pace slightly hurried, betraying my inner unrest. My mother's expectations, the future of the territory, and my complex bond with the princess. It was all too much. At the castle steps, I stopped and said, my voice low, "Princess, I have military matters to attend to. Please, go rest." Louise glanced at me, then quickly looked away, whispering, "Duty comes first. Go ahead." They parted ways. Louise headed upstairs, while I strode toward the command office. Inside, my corps officers stood waiting by the oak table, their shadows stretching across the map of the northern frontier like restless ghosts. I entered, still carrying the weight of my mother's departure. As I stepped in, the officers stood in unison, saluting me. I nodded, walked to the head of the table, and stood with my hands pressed against the map, my gaze sharp as I scanned the tense faces of my officers. I went straight to the point. "Brendan, what are the Solonians doing? Is our front still quiet?" Brendan stepped forward, pointing to the area northeast of Confort. "It's unnervingly quiet. According to scouts and Miller of the Tyrol Regiment, the Solonian raiders and small units that were active on our front have vanished over the last half-month. They've seemingly abandoned their offensive against Confort and Tyrol, consolidating their forces toward the Golden City and Twin Rivers City. Even their routine harassment has ceased." He added, "Since Sir Lawrence's departure from France City and Miller's takeover, the Tyrol defense line is secure and the walls have been reinforced. Miller believes the Solonians lack the strength for an effective attack on Tyrol for now. Our southwest flank is currently in a state of unsettling calm. The threat is effectively neutralized." Calm? Vanished. I tapped the map, brow furrowed. This abnormal silence usually signaled a gathering storm. Brendan took a breath and used a pointer to mark a strategic pass on the northern border. Combined intelligence, including reports from Count Eisenberg's territory and merchant caravans, confirms the Solonians made major moves in late September. He pointed to Blackstone Pass and Wharton's Castle. Thousands of Solonian elites attacked these outposts. 3 of their 8 major legions are confirmed involved: the Bear Legion under Sven, the Sparrow Legion under Ulf, and the Sword Legion under Ivar. Sven and Ulf are leading the assault on Blackstone Pass. He lowered his voice. They've integrated Plantagenet defectors and their own musketeer guard equipped with matchlock muskets. More importantly, 10,000 troops from the Valaya Principality have joined them as auxiliary forces. Richter sneered. Harold didn't wipe out the Iron Islands, but he terrified the Valaya Principality. That old fox Erwin saw the Solonian momentum and the crumbling Plantagenet frontier, so he knelt immediately, sending auxiliaries to secure a seat at the coming feast. My expression remained cold. Valaya's betrayal was expected but worsened the situation, providing the Solonians with local guides familiar with the border defenses. Brendan continued. Rumors suggested they might strike Eglinist. Count Eisenberg sent his deputy, Valerius, with cavalry to investigate, leading to several skirmishes. He circled the area east of Eglinist. Both sides took losses, but the Solonian cavalry proved more numerous and fierce. Valerius was pushed back, losing elite scouts. Crucially, Brendan slammed his pointer between Eglinist and Blackstone Pass. Since then, we, and the royal capital, have lost all contact with the Solonian main force. Eisenberg's scouts can't cross their blockade. We only know they burned all the wheat fields outside the pass, shrouding the area in smoke. Since then, they've stopped all major offensives. The room fell silent. Scorched earth was a standard tactic to deny supplies, but it could also be a screen for their true intentions. And Eisenberg, my voice was chillingly calm. He holds half the northern border forces and the best supplies. He's just watching. Brendan showed a hint of disdain. After Valerius's defeat, Count Eisenberg retreated into Eglinist and nearby fortresses, sealing off all roads and blocking messengers. He claims he's avoiding an enemy trap, but he's effectively blinded us to the Solonian strength and intent at the Blackstone-Wharton's line. Roland cursed, "Coward. He sits on the best pay and the fattest troops, yet lets the enemy blind us at his doorstep." I silenced the room, staring at the blank spot on the map, my finger tapping on Confort. What was Harold planning? Why assemble such a force, attack the border, and then stop after gaining tactical superiority? This didn't fit the Solonian pattern of swift, locust-like raids. They were postured for a formal siege, yet they had stalled. Unless their target wasn't Eisenberg or the grain. My gaze moved from the border, past the cowering Eisenberg, down to the golden mark on the map, the royal capital, Play City. They consolidated for a reason. "Richter, what have our people and the capital reported?" Intelligence Officer Richter stepped forward, pointing to the northern passes. "Commander Brendan is correct. Our eyes in the Solonian-controlled zones and reports from the capital confirm a massive buildup of Solonian main forces, far exceeding any autumn raid." He added, "They aren't just cavalry. They've brought slaves and are building siege engines in their camps, ladders, rams, and possibly cannons. This is no mere border skirmish." Richter looked at the shocked officers. "The consensus is that the Solonians aren't here to raid. They intend to strike the royal capital, Play City, and topple the kingdom. A war of annihilation? They're insane. The capital was just raided last year." The officers gasped, despite their prior concerns. The Plantagenet kingdom was already suffering from internal rebellion, drought, and the aftermath of last year's looting. Everyone realized how weak the kingdom was, but the audacity of the Solonian plan was staggering. All eyes turned to me. The young lord was their backbone. My decision would determine the fate of the region. I stood with my back to them, staring at the map. My finger traced a long path from Confort, north, then down to the royal capital. The room was silent, save for the crackling hearth. A feint? Or a lure? I whispered. Everyone held their breath. Harold is using the Blackstone buildup to posture for a northern invasion. He successfully scared Eisenberg into hiding, blinding us. The burning of the fields was both for supplies and to make us believe they were preparing for a long-term siege or raid. I turned, my eyes burning. But what if his main force, or a significant detachment, has already used this smokescreen to slip south toward the poorly defended capital? "The capital is still recovering from last year," Richter said, his face pale. "If they have siege engines and internal collaborators." Furthermore, Brendan said hoarsely, "the royal capital's lords and our wise Queen Mother are blinded by the army at Blackstone Pass. They'll pressure Eisenberg to fight or divert troops to the Eagle's Nest, leaving the capital exposed, or perhaps intentionally weakened." Silence filled the room. The theory was terrifying. If true, the Plantagenet kingdom faced total annihilation. "That is the worst-case scenario," I said, forcing calm. "We need proof, but we cannot wait for it to arrive." I stood tall, my gaze sharp. Whatever Harold's true goal, his buildup at the border is both a threat and an opportunity for Confort. Eisenberg is blind, and the capital is a mystery, but we cannot sit idle. I turned to Brendan and Richter. "How is the offensive plan I ordered?" Brendan stepped forward. "The preliminary plan is ready. Harass their supply lines or seize weak points to force them to split their forces. But with the Solon main forces' movements unknown, the risk is high. Prepare the plan, but adjust the targets." I pointed at the map between the Golden City, Twin River City, and Blackstone Pass. "We must act as eyes and a dagger, not just a blunt force." "Richter, how many reliable men do you have who can infiltrate Solon-controlled territory?" Richter pondered. "Few, but I have some desperate men who know the terrain and speak the Solan language. My lord, you intend to send them. Spare no cost to uncover the Solan main forces' true movements and troop distribution. Find out if they are secretly moving south, and scout the defenses of the Golden City and Twin Rivers City. I ordered. Yes. Brendan, assemble the troops and stockpile supplies. Prepare for a northern campaign. If the Solan main force is truly heading for the capital, their home base will be vulnerable. We will either strike their heart or stab their flank to stop their advance. Yes. Also, I told the communications officer, draft an urgent report in my name to the Royal Capital's military department and all reachable border lords. Warn them of the potential trap, urge them to bolster defenses, and demand Eisenberg resume frontline reconnaissance immediately. We cannot let Harold toy with us. Yes, my lord. The war room buzzed with urgent activity. Conford's war machine began to accelerate, seeking a path to victory amidst the fog of war. I glanced at the abandoned Eagle's Nest fortress on the map. Eisenberg was a fool, but for now, identifying Harold's true target was paramount. Dismissed. Prepare accordingly. I waved. The officers saluted and exited. Alone, I walked to the window, staring into the dark, northern night. Harold, what is your game this time? I whispered. Regardless, Conford would not wait for death. By late September, the northern frontier was already in the grip of early winter. Lead gray skies loomed, and biting winds whipped snow across the barren land. The wilderness was withered, with only sparse, shivering weeds and snow-capped mountains in the distance. The cold arrived earlier and harsher than in previous years. On the village outskirts, two figures wrapped in tattered furs trudged through the muddy, freezing road. Einar and Thomas carried heavy sacks containing meager rations, rye, dried beans, and a small bag of salt, bought from a distant Solan outpost with their last savings. Since the defeat at Conford, Einar's raiding party had been decimated, and he had nearly died. Thomas, then his slave, had miraculously found a stray horse and carried the wounded Einar to safety. Luck favored them. They found a stash of silver coins in the horse's saddle, more than they had hoped to loot. This windfall allowed them to escape to the edge of Solan-controlled territory. Einar, having lost his men and loot, was genuinely grateful for Thomas's life-saving intervention. He kept his word, sharing the silver and using his influence to promote Thomas to a low-ranking Solan warrior, granting him basic rights and the ability to own weapons. Thomas used his share to hire drifters to build a small, makeshift cabin next to Einar's. They reached the village fork, where two dilapidated huts stood, their chimneys emitting faint smoke. Master, I shall return now, Thomas said, bowing out of habit. Despite his new status, Thomas maintained his respectful demeanor, a survival tactic in their harsh environment. Go, Thomas. Secure your door, Einar said, pulling his worn fur coat tighter. His back was hunched. The weight of life was heavier than any blade. Thomas retreated to his own small shack. He knew their funds were nearly gone. The future looked bleak. Einar pushed open his door, greeted by the smell of damp earth and smoke. In the yard, a gaunt, young Plantagenet slave and a female slave were struggling to stack firewood under the eaves. The male slave was dressed in rags and old quilts stuffed with grass for warmth, his head wrapped in a filthy cloth. The cold had turned his face blue, his nose red, and he wiped his runny nose with a greasy, worn sleeve. Seeing Einar, the slave smiled obsequiously and hurried over to take the heavy pack, stuttering in broken Solan. Master, you're back. Let me handle the heavy work. Please go inside and warm up. Einar, heavy-hearted, ignored the slave and walked into the dim room. Inside, a fire pit in the center of the dirt floor provided little warmth. Einar's wife, also wrapped in tattered furs, was boiling a thin soup of wild vegetables and a scrap of dried meat. She stood up, brushing snow from his clothes, worried. Did you get food? It's getting colder, and we're low on wood. Einar sat on a cold wooden stump, warming his frozen hands, and sighed. I got some rye and beans, but it won't last. Prices have risen again. That was our last silver. Einar looked at his wife's anxious face and rasped. Our silver coins are running out. This winter will be hard to survive. His wife's face paled, her brow furrowing. The coins were gone long ago, and winter has only just begun. Trembling, She rubbed her frozen hands. Between food and firewood, how are we supposed to survive? After a silence, she steeled herself. We might have to sell the 2 slaves. Helen next door said her neighbors are looking to buy. They've already lost several slaves to the cold. Her words struck Einar like ice. With no money left, how could they afford the necessities of winter? Selling slaves was a desperate but common choice for Solon families. Helen's news made the grim reality undeniable. Einar frowned, rubbing his stiff fingers. We only have 2. If we sell them, who will work the fields come spring? I can't do it alone. As a warrior, farming wasn't his strength. His wife sat in silence, her face gaunt in the firelight. She had clearly thought this through. Many in this village manage without slaves. We can too. If you fear for your training, sell only the woman. Helen's family needs a worker. We might get some silver and grain in return. Einar looked at his wife's pregnant belly. And you? You're getting heavier. You'll have no one to help you. She smiled bitterly. She's too weak to do heavy work anyway. Selling her buys us food, and I can still manage. Despite her words, her eyes betrayed her fear of the coming labor. Einar sighed, the weight of their empty purse and the howling wind crushing his spirit. Defeated, he slumped back. Fine. Do as you say. I'll speak to Helen's husband tomorrow. It was a desperate, short-sighted move, but they had no other choice. To break the suffocating silence, his wife complained. Why is grain so expensive this year? They say the great chief brought back plenty of grain and slaves from the Plantagenet kingdom, yet we have nothing. The question fueled Einar's resentment. It's those damned Conford people. Einar spat. The great chief sent most of the loot to fortify the Golden City and Twin Rivers City against them. Feeding those armies consumes everything. What reaches us is scarce and overpriced because of them. Those cursed Southerners, his wife echoed, her voice heavy with impotent rage. They fell silent again, the only sound the crackling fire and the howling northern wind. The pressure of survival felt like a cold stone on their chests. Eventually, Einar stood to order the shivering male slave to prepare their meager dinner. Suddenly, a sound pierced the air. A deep, resonant conch shell blast echoed from the center of the village, carrying an undeniable sense of urgency. Einar jolted upright as if burned, his lethargy vanishing instantly. His exhaustion was replaced by shock, tension, and a long-suppressed, bloodthirsty excitement. His wife looked up, trembling. Husband, what is that? The assembly horn. Einar grabbed his cap and dagger. I'm going to see what the chief says. He threw open the door, ignoring the biting wind, and rushed into the yard to track the signal. The male slave stood frozen in fear. Einar pulled on his cap and sprinted out of the hut. He squinted through the snow toward the center of the village. The village gate was open, and the burly village chief was rushing out, half-dressed. A ragged slave brought him a sturdy northern pony. The chief mounted and galloped toward the village entrance. Woo! Whomp! A second blast sounded, this time from further away, signaling a call to arms. Doors creaked open as other Solon men emerged, their faces a mix of suspicion, tension, and restless energy. They began to stream toward the village entrance. Einar joined the flow, hurrying through the frozen mud. By the time he reached the clearing, 20 men had already gathered. The chief sat on his horse, watching the crowd with a grim expression. The men, scarred and hardened, waited in silence. You heard it, the chief roared. The tribe is mobilizing. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. We don't know the target yet, the chief continued, scanning their faces. But this is likely a southern raid against the Plantagenets. There's land, grain, and gold to be taken. Einar's heart leaped with joy, as long as it wasn't Conford. The memory of that disastrous defeat a year ago still haunted him. The walls, the arrows, and that young knight who fought like a reaper. If not for Thomas stealing a horse and finding that bag of silver, they would have died long ago. Raid the wealthy but poorly defended Plantagenet villages? It's a windfall, the village chief declared. Prepare your weapons and rations. Await my signal. Delay will be punished by military law. I spurred my horse, galloping toward the next village, my hooves kicking up frozen mud and snow. The crowd dispersed, filled with a mix of excitement, anxiety, and calculation. Einar breathed a sigh of relief, heading home with a lighter step, already envisioning the spoils of war. Near my yard, I encountered Thomas, who emerged from a wooden hut, looking urgent. "Master, what happened? Was that the assembly call?" I grinned and clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "Yes, we're marching south to raid the Plantagenets. No more worrying about winter food." Thomas's eyes lit up. "Truly? Master, you must take me. I'll be your vanguard and bring back the best loot." "Count on it," I agreed. "You're sharp and lucky. Keep your eyes peeled for grain, cloth, furs, and gold. We'll make a fortune." "Yes, master." Thomas rubbed his hands in excitement. They parted ways, and I entered my home, bringing a gust of cold air and my irrepressible excitement. My wife, waiting by the hearth, asked anxiously, "What happened?" I removed my hat, my face glowing. "Good news. The tribe is marching south to raid the Plantagenets, not Confort." His wife's joy was quickly eclipsed by worry. "War again? It's so dangerous." "Don't worry," I interrupted confidently. "It's a raid, not a siege. They're wealthy and undefended. We'll be back in a month or two with enough food and wealth to keep you and the baby fed through winter." I planned aloud. "I'm taking Thomas. I'll sell our male slave to Helen's family tomorrow for cash. Keep the female slave to help you until I return." Seeing her husband's renewed spirit, her anxiety faded into hope. She hugged me, burying her face in my cold, tobacco-scented coat. "Be careful, come back soon." I held her tight, feeling the life in her womb. "I will. For you and the child. I'll return with plenty of spoils." By the fire, the gloom was replaced by a warm sense of hope. Despite the shadow of war, for Einar's family, this was a chance to escape poverty. Outside, the north wind howled, but my heart burned with the prospect of a successful raid. October 25th, year 1 of Sigmund I. The Plantagenet capital, Play City. October in Play City smelled of wood, rust, mud, and sweat, the scent of war preparations. The city walls, damaged in last year's raids, were now reinforced with tall, sturdy stone battlements. The walls were lined with new wooden shields, reinforced firing ports, and polished cannons covered in tarps. Bronze cannons and heavy matchlocks, salvaged and repaired by royal craftsmen, were positioned to create a lethal crossfire. The moat had been doubled in width and depth, filled with flowing water and sharpened stakes. Buildings and trees across the moat were cleared to create a dead zone. The drawbridge was raised, the gatehouse locked, and the ironclad gates reinforced with massive logs. Inside, streets were widened for troop movement, and alleyways were barricaded with sandbags. Squares were filled with tents housing noble private armies, militia, and the city guard. Over 50,000 armed men were gathered, creating a formidable, if uneven, display of strength. Queen Mother Catherine had successfully paid off months of back wages, boosting morale. The silver and copper coins in the soldiers' hands dispelled their resentment. Markets thrived as soldiers bought winter gear and food, their spirits lifted. The streets echoed with vows to defend the capital and repel the Solonians. Under the Ministry of Livelihoods William, grain and supplies poured into the city's warehouses. Mountains of grain, arrows, gunpowder, and iron ensured the city could survive a long winter. Officials estimated that even under siege, the city could outlast the Solonians. Queen Mother Catherine observed all this from her palace, monitoring every report. Standing on the highest balcony, she looked over the city with a rare, satisfied expression. Walls raised, moat widened, cannons ready, troops paid. She whispered, "Harold, if you dare come, Place City will be your grave." She was pleased with the bureaucracy's efficiency under pressure. Money and resources had been funneled to the capital, and her decision to spend royal reserves on military pay had secured loyalty. The investment was paying off. A courier arrived with news. Governor of the Three Borders, Bowles von Herrick's, reports, "We have crushed the main rebel force at Black Wind Valley, killed the Black Hawk, William, and scattered his followers. The rebel leader's head will arrive soon. The Northwest is stabilizing. Detailed battle reports confirm the victory." Excellent. Bowles did not disappoint, Catherine thought, feeling triumphant. The Northwest rebels had been a major threat. Crushing them was a significant political victory. It vindicated her judgment and silenced her critics. "Preserve Black Hawk William's head in lime," she ordered her lady-in-waiting. "Display it at the West Market for 3 days to show our might." Bowles's victory was the perfect addition to her preparations. With the perfect addition to her preparations. With the northwest pacified and the capital fortified, she felt the kingdom beginning to recover under her rule. Though the Selonians in the north and treacherous southern nobles remained, the heart of the kingdom was now strong. Let the Selonians come, she thought, looking north. If they break themselves against this fortress, my authority will be absolute. With a great victory, she would consolidate power, purge dissent, and lead the Plantagenet kingdom to a new golden age. She turned away, her dress rustling. Order the army to maximum alert. Tell Eisenberg to watch Blackstone Pass closely. If the Selonians move, report immediately. I want no mistakes. Yes, Your Majesty, the lady-in-waiting bowed. Queen Mother Catherine smiled coldly. She was confident she had built an impenetrable dam against the coming storm. She eagerly awaited the moment Harold's army would shatter against her fortified city, cementing her absolute authority. By late October, the northern frontier air was freezing. A pale moon was swallowed by thick clouds, while the howling north wind carried snow like icy blades across the desolate plains. Wintersburg stood as a dark, silent silhouette, its gloom deepened by flickering torches on the battlements that threatened to extinguish at any moment. A wolf's howl echoed from the darkness, answered by nearby bushes before silence returned. On the walls, elderly, infirm guards huddled under tattered blankets, ignoring the sounds. To them, the cries of wild beasts were far more common than any Selonian threat. Though Wintersburg had been breached by Selonians before, Count Eisenberg had barely reinforced the low earthen walls or the dilapidated defenses. The guards, dulled by cold and sleep, deemed any attack in such weather an act of madness. They were unaware that lethal danger lurked just 100 paces away. Thomas followed his leader, Einar, as they crawled across the frozen, biting earth. His breath condensed into frost on his face mask. He was part of a 50-man night raid team, chosen for his endurance during the grueling month-long march. Since leaving Frostguard in early October, this elite force from the Sparrow Regiment had moved like a dark current across the wilderness. They reached the outskirts of the Eagle's Nest Fortress on the night of October 26th. Einar's unit, under the command of the notorious Sven, had Wintersburg as its primary target. Thomas's heart raced with a mix of fear and the thrill of being trusted. He pressed his body into the terrain, mimicking the veteran soldiers. He wore 2 layers of padded armor beneath old chainmail, keeping him warm but bulky. The thick cloth mask also hid his Plantagenet features. Suddenly, their guide, a local defector, emitted a sharp, rodent-like signal. Einar moved forward instantly, crawling with steady, practiced determination. His movements were as confident as if he were walking home. This resolve gave Thomas the courage he needed. He suppressed his nerves and followed Einar's lead. The biting cold and sharp stones were ignored. The wind roared, accompanied by the faint rustle of my chainmail. I felt my comrades moving behind me like a pack of wolves closing in. As the dark walls of Wintersburg loomed, I gripped my hand axe, my palms slick with sweat. Success or death would be decided in the next few breaths. I focused entirely on Einar, no longer a slave or a mere soldier, but a Fong ready to tear through the Plantagenet border. The wind masked the sound of their approach. Over 100 shadows pressed against the rough earthen walls of Wintersburg. The howling wind drowned out their breathing and the soft clinking of their armor. Felt-wrapped scaling ladders were silently raised against the frozen walls. The padding muffled the impact, rendering the sound imperceptible. Einar, wearing a breastplate over his chainmail, looked sharp and deadly. He removed his frost-covered mask, his face tight with tension. Clenching a ladder-climbing knife in his teeth, he prepared to ascend. Only a few torches flickered on the walls, and voices drifted from the distant gatehouse. He signaled his men and climbed with the agility of a mountain cat. Thomas followed, his hands steady despite his racing heart. The ladder creaked faintly, but the wind swallowed the noise. Einar reached the top and scanned the area. A few Plantagenet guards were dozing near the battlements, one snoring softly. Further away, near the gatehouse, others were chatting by a fire. The moment was perfect. Einar vaulted onto the wall in silence. He signaled 2 other Selonian veterans to move to the opposite side. They drew their blades and crept toward the sentries. Thomas and the others climbed up, taking positions to guard the gatehouse entrance with swords and knives. Another squad moved toward the stairs to secure the main gate. Einar struck, muffling his target's mouth before driving his knife into the guard's heart. The guard died instantly, his body twitching without alerting the others nearby. However, the other veteran's strike missed the heart, piercing the guard's lung instead. The guard gasped, blood bubbling in his throat as he struggled to scream. Einar lunged over, pinning the struggling man down and clamping a hand over his mouth. He drove his knife home again, ending the struggle for good. The soldier convulsed, eyes bulging as he stared at the shadowy, demonic face before him, before collapsing lifelessly. A faint scent of blood filled the air but was quickly dispersed by the cold wind. From scaling the wall to eliminating the sentries, only a dozen breaths had passed. The operation was swift and lethal. The laughter inside the tower continued, oblivious to the carnage outside. Thomas leaned against the cold wall, his heart pounding and his sword hand slick with sweat. Witnessing the sudden transformation of living men into corpses stirred a mix of nausea and a strange, adrenaline-fueled tremor within him. He was surprised by how easily the legendary castle was being breached, especially given the enemy's laxity. A surge of excitement replaced his fear. The surprise attack was a success, and Wintersburg was within their grasp. With the city gates opened, the first troops to enter would claim the spoils. He licked his lips, envisioning the riches awaiting him. Einar wiped his blade, signaled his men to secure the stairs, and cast a cold, warning glance at Thomas and the others to remain silent and alert. A massive Solon warrior smashed the heavy wooden door open, the splintering wood shattering the noisy atmosphere inside. Einar surged in like an arrow, followed by a dozen fierce Solon soldiers. Inside, a dozen Plantagenet soldiers sat around a table, surrounded by the stench of cheap ale and roasted meat. Drunken and merry, they barely registered the intrusion before the armored barbarians descended upon them. Einar locked eyes with a soldier who had just stood up in shock. Moving like a shadow, Einar grabbed the man's wrist and drove his ladder-climbing knife deep into the soldier's unprotected abdomen. The blade pierced leather armor and cotton, sinking to the hilt. The soldier let out a piercing scream, blood foaming from his mouth. Using the dying man as a human shield, Einar roared and shoved him backward into the heavy wooden table. The table overturned with a crash, sending bottles and food scattering. The surrounding guards were knocked off balance by the debris and the falling corpse, rendering them helpless. Kill. Leave no one alive. The Solon soldiers swarmed in, wielding maces, battle axes, and blades against the panicked, unarmed guards. In the dim light, weapons flashed, painting the room in arcs of blood. The air filled with the sounds of breaking bones, tearing flesh, and desperate screams. The Solon soldiers fought with seasoned, ruthless coordination. Working in groups of 3, they systematically slaughtered the disorganized Plantagenet soldiers. One guard was crushed by a mace, another had his legs severed by axes, and a third was decapitated while begging for mercy. The skirmish quickly devolved into a one-sided massacre. Thomas entered the room last, finding the slaughter nearly finished. Blood pooled on the floor, flowing through the cracks in the stone. Solon soldiers were finishing off the wounded or looting the dead, while Einar cleaned his blade, scanning the room. Suddenly, a Plantagenet soldier who had been feigning injury leaped up from a corner. He bolted toward the stairs, aiming for the second-floor observation window. "He's escaping," a Solon soldier shouted. As the man reached the stairs, Einar barked, "Thomas, stop him." Driven by instinct, Thomas didn't hesitate. He roared and gave chase, sprinting over corpses and blood toward the narrow stone stairs. They reached the second floor in moments. The second floor was a small observation room with a closed wooden window. The guard slammed into the window, bursting it open to the cold air outside. He intended to jump. It was a dangerous fall, but better than certain death at the hands of the Solonians. "Not a chance," Thomas shouted, lunging forward. Fearing the guard would escape to raise the alarm, Thomas swung a heavy Plantagenet military sword at the man's neck with all his might. The guard twisted at the last second, parrying the blow with his short sword. Sparks flew as metal clashed. The impact jarred my arm, numbing my hand. My strike lacked precision, and the guard managed to block it. My sword chipped, and the guard, though shaken, retreated against the wall, glaring with venomous fear. Enraged by my failure, I felt a surge of humiliated fury. Abandoning technique, I roared and charged, ignoring the guard's pointed blade. I swiped the guard's wrist aside, taking a shallow cut to my own arm, and dropped my sword to grapple the man in a bear hug. The guard struck my head and back, but the armor held firm. "Die with me," I screamed, throwing my weight backward. The two tumbled together, crashing down the stone stairs. A sickening series of thuds and the sound of snapping bone echoed through the stairwell, followed by a final, stifled groan. Einar and his men arrived to find Thomas and the Plantagenet soldier lying in a twisted heap at the bottom of the stairs. Thomas lay bleeding and dizzy, struggling to rise after a hard fall. Beneath him, a guard lay dead, his eyes vacant and blood bubbling from his mouth. The guard's spine and skull were shattered, leaving him beyond saving. Einar stepped forward, shoved the corpse's arm aside, and confirmed the man was dead. Seeing Thomas's injuries and the blood-streaked stairs, Einar grasped what had transpired. "Well done, kid," Einar said, clapping Thomas's shoulder. "Ruthless and fearless. You've got the makings of a soldier." The nearby Solon soldiers looked at Thomas with newfound respect. To them, ferocity and a lack of fear were the highest virtues. Thomas leaned against the cold wall, his body aching and his head throbbing. He stared at the cooling corpse, feeling a mix of lingering terror, relief, and a strange, visceral thrill at having taken a life. With the interior secured and the gate opened from within, the battle for the outpost ended. Outside, the rhythmic thud of hoofbeats and boots signaled the arrival of Sven's main force. Wintersburg had fallen silently to the Solonians' precision night raid. At dawn, Count Eisenberg slept soundly in his luxurious eagle's nest fortress bedroom. Outside, the morning was gloomy, shrouded in thick fog. My lord, disaster." A servant pounded on the door, screaming in terror. The count bolted upright, his heart racing. "Get in here," he roared, shaken from his sleep. The trembling servant crawled in, babbling. "My lord, the Solonians, the Sorin barbarians. A massive army has surrounded the fortress." Eisenberg paled, leaping out of bed and onto the cold floor. "Impossible. They are besieging the royal capital. What about Blackstone Pass?" "It's true. They are everywhere, as far as the eye can see," the servant cried, pointing toward the window. Chilled to the bone, the count grabbed a fur robe and rushed toward the highest watchtower, ignoring his lack of footwear. Attendants scrambled to follow with his armor and boots. Reaching the tower, the biting wind was nothing compared to the sight before him. The fortress walls were in total chaos. Soldiers crowded the battlements, panicked and deaf to their officers' frantic orders. Eisenberg rushed to the crenellations to look out. On the western plains, a sea of enemy banners stretched across the horizon. Solon light cavalry circled just outside bowshot, taunting the defenders with sharp whistles and displays of horsemanship. Further out, the scene was even more daunting. A vast, endless swarm of men, horses, and supply wagons covered the land. They were methodically setting up camp, digging trenches, and erecting palisades. Along the road, endless supply trains continued to arrive. Smoke rose from burning villages and outposts in the distance. The air smelled of ash and death. This was no mere raiding party. It was a full-scale siege force intended to crush the northern frontier's gateway. Impossible. Eisenberg gripped the stone, his knuckles white. The realization hit him. It's a trap. The intelligence about the royal capital and Blackstone Pass had been a carefully crafted smokescreen. The enemy had baited the kingdom into focusing all resources on the south. Their true target had always been the vulnerable Eagle's Nest fortress. Shivering, the Count felt the weight of his own negligence. He recalled his dismissal of warnings and his failure to reinforce reconnaissance, now consumed by regret. Yet, his instinct for self-preservation kicked in, overriding his panic. "No, I still have a chance. Eagle's Nest is the strongest fortress in the north," he told himself. "With Tenjong walls, deep trenches, and 3 months of supplies for 30,000 men, what can they do? I will hold out. If I don't engage, they'll break themselves against these walls until winter kills them." This thought steadied his nerves. He forced himself to look composed, masking his fear with a facade of disdain. Turning to his terrified men, He shouted, "Stop this panic. These Soren barbarians are fools to attack us. They've walked right into their own graves." He strode to a bronze cannon, a heavy piece recently gifted from the royal capital. Pushing aside the stunned gunner, he aimed the weapon at a group of taunting scouts. "Fire! Let them taste the might of Eagle's Nest," he bellowed, slamming his hand down. The gunner lit the fuse. Boom! A deafening roar erupted as the cannon fired, sending a heavy ball screaming toward the enemy. The shot landed far short, kicking up dirt and startling the inexperienced guards, failing to hit a single target. The cannon blast rang out like a thunderclap, shattering the suffocating panic on the fortress walls. The defenders stared at the smoking cannon, then at the Solon scouts who had instinctively reined in their horses, and finally at their fearless count. A strange mix of blind obedience and suppressed terror rippled through the crowd. "Long live the count! Well shot! Come back and fight, you barbarians!" Someone shouted, and soon the scattered cries merged into a unified, roaring chant. They brandished their weapons, hurling insults and challenges at the enemy outside. The earlier panic was temporarily dispelled by the heroic display and the morale-boosting shot. Morale on the walls was twistedly restored. Hearing the cheers and feeling the renewed awe of his men, Count Eisenberg's pale face flushed with an unnatural, feverish color. Straightening his back, he commanded firmly, "See? The barbarians are nothing. Man the walls. Ready the cannons, ballistae, and muskets. Prepare the logs, stones, and fecal soup. No one is to sortie without my order. We shall make Eagle's Nest the graveyard of these Solon barbarians." "As you command, my lord. We shall live and die with the fortress," the officers replied in unison. Satisfied, the count took one last look at the daunting Solon army, suppressed his shivering, and descended the tower. The biting cold of the stone steps kept him alert. Back in the main keep, he ordered, "Send the finest messengers to break through. Alert the royal capital and all nearby lords. Tell them the Solon main force is here. Eagle's Nest is besieged, and we need immediate reinforcements." "Yes, my lord." Watching the messengers depart, the count collapsed into his bearskin chair, cold sweat finally soaking his nightclothes. Outside lay the vast Solon army. Inside were 30,000 anxious soldiers and countless civilians. How long could his performance last? Would reinforcements arrive? He had no choice now. Eagle's Nest had become an island in the eye of a storm. Known for his caution and defensive expertise, the count faced the greatest, and perhaps final, test of his career within the fortress he used to protect and imprison himself. The echo of the cannon faded, but the dark clouds of war had fully enveloped Eagle's Nest. The true siege had begun. A biting morning wind whipped across the frozen wilderness, carrying dust and snow that rattled against the marching troops. A gray torrent of men and carts snaked silently toward the southeast. This was the Solon detachment led by Ulf and Sven, heading for the flank of Eagle's Nest. It comprised over 30,000 warriors, plus an equal number of auxiliaries, slaves, and a massive supply train. Near a Sparrow Legion banner, a minor incident broke out. "You lazy dog, keep moving." Angry shouts and the crack of a whip shattered the march's rhythm. Thomas, a former slave turned Solon warrior, lashed out with an oil-soaked leather whip at a ragged slave curled on the ground. Snap! Snap! Each strike drew a muffled cry and tore through the slave's tattered clothes. The victim was a gaunt boy of 15 or 16, shivering in the cold, his back already marked with bloody welts. He had tried to push a cart loaded with arrows, but the wheels had caught in the frozen mud, causing him to stumble and fall. Thomas whipped him a dozen times until his arm grew numb and he stopped, panting with exertion. With a fierce glare, he scanned the other 7 or 8 terrified slaves pushing carts and carrying gear. These were Plantagenet captives, assigned to him by Einar to manage. "What are you looking at? Listen up," Thomas rasped, pointing his whip at the groaning boy. "Anyone else who slows down or drops their load, delaying our Lord's business, I will slaughter them myself and hang their head on the cart. Do you understand?" "Yes, yes, master." The slaves trembled, scrambling to push their carts and carry the heavy weapon crates, grain bags, and even iron shovels and plows. Thomas kicked the boy. "Get up. If you can't move, you'll be wolf-feed." The boy climbed up, and with the others, pushed the cart free, rejoining the slow-moving column. Thomas caught his breath, though his inner agitation remained. He straightened up and touched the decent blade he'd looted from a Wintersbug corpse, a symbol of his new status. He looked out at the suffocating tide of war. Banners depicting bare claws, iron beaks, and broken swords snapped in the gray sky. Solon warriors in leather, chainmail, and stolen Plantagenet armor marched in silence, the only sound being the rhythmic thud of boots and hooves on frozen earth. Messengers in silver half-plate armor darted through the ranks like fish, delivering orders with sharp shouts before order returned. The air reeked of sweat, animal dung, rust, and the cold, oppressive weight of a massive military operation. In the distance, the dust cloud of the main force under Harold moved toward the southeast. Thomas's detachment took a hidden path, acting like a poisoned dagger aimed at the fortress's weaker northwest flank. Thomas's Sparrow Legion was under Ulf's direct command. The force included Solon elites, fierce Skarn grassland cavalry, and an endless train of slaves carrying heavy supplies. Thomas was puzzled by the requirement for slaves and auxiliaries to carry heavy farming tools, shovels, hoes, and plows. Why carry this junk? It can't kill anyone, he had muttered. Einar, cleaning his scimitar, had scoffed, pointing toward the silhouette of Eagle's Nest. Foolish boy, war isn't just about blades. The great chief is far-sighted. Once we take that stone cage, do you expect our warriors to dig the earth? These junk tools will be vital for trenches and fortifications. We can't just rely on looting forever. He patted Thomas's shoulder. Learn, boy. Don't just think about killing. Harold sees further than we do. Once we take that stone cage, do you expect our warriors to dig the earth themselves? These junk tools will be vital for digging the trench and building fortifications, or perhaps even farming nearby. We can't rely on looting forever. Patting Thomas on the shoulder with a condescending air, Einar advised, Learn, boy. Don't just think about killing and looting. Harold sees much further than we do. Thomas nodded, wondering if the tools were for siege works or to force slaves into farming to sustain the army. It sounded logical, yet a lingering sense of unease remained. Solonians usually raided quickly. They never brought equipment for long-term construction or agriculture. This southern campaign was different. My anxiety was soon eclipsed by the thrill of ambition and dreams of a better life. My brutal performance at Wintersbug, where I fought with suicidal ferocity, had earned me the respect of veterans like Einar. After the battle, Einar gave Thomas leather armor, a fine saber, and a small bag of silver coins. Einar even promised, You fought like a true Solon warrior. After this, I'll get you 3 acres of land, 2 strong slaves, and your pick of any Plantagenet woman we capture. Land, slaves, and women, once impossible dreams, now felt within reach. Managing my small group of slaves gave me my first taste of power. I found myself intoxicated by the authority of whipping and commanding them. Compared to my life as a slave in Conford, this new existence, though dangerous, offered status and violent passion. I gripped my saber, looking toward the Eagle's Nest fortress, the gateway to my new life. The army's true intent was forgotten, replaced by my desire for wealth and my new identity as a Solon warrior. The army crawled across the wasteland like a giant, hungry centipede toward its prey. Thomas adjusted his fur coat, kicked a lagging slave, and joined the tide of blood and fire. Early November, year 1 of Sigmundi, royal capital play. The Eagle's Nest is surrounded. The main Solon force is there. Queen Mother Catherine's voice trembled with uncharacteristic, shrill panic. She clutched the frantic, blood-stained dispatch from Count Eisenberg, her nails digging into the parchment. Her face drained of color, her composure shattered. The throne room fell into a deathly silence. Officials who had been celebrating the recent victory at Conford stood paralyzed, faces pale. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by suffocating dread. How is this possible? Weren't the Solonians attacking the capital? What about Blackstone Pass and Wharton's Castle? The Eagle's Nest? With Count Eisenberg's thousands of elite troops? It's a feint. We've been deceived. Whispers turned into panicked shouting. Even the most seasoned politicians felt a chill. They had been complacent, believing their defenses and paid armies secured their victory. Instead, they had been played, the threat to the capital was merely a diversion. The Solonians had bypassed their impenetrable lines to strike the northern throat of the kingdom, the eagle's nest. Catherine rose abruptly, knocking over a teacup with a sharp, jarring crash. Her chest heaved, her eyes held shock, regret, and a dark premonition regarding her father, Eisenberg. She knew him too well. Cowardly, selfish, and greedy. Could he hold against a full-scale Solon assault? Would he surrender to save his own skin? The thought struck her like a viper, leaving her unsteady. If the fortress fell, the Solonians would seize massive stockpiles, open the northern gate, and break the spine of the Plantagenet kingdom. Total collapse was imminent. Silence, the attendant shrieked, suppressing the chaos. Catherine forced a breath, digging her nails into her palms to regain focus. She sat back down, though her rigid posture betrayed her inner turmoil. Scanning the trembling court, she commanded, "The situation is dire, but the kingdom stands. Discuss. How do we break the siege?" A veteran general stepped forward. "The Solonians have just arrived and are not yet entrenched. We must march the capital's elite and the loyalist reinforcements north immediately to strike them while they are exhausted." "No," a civil official countered, trembling. "Remember the defeat at Osric Castle. Last year, they used a feint to lure us into a field battle, annihilating 50,000 men. Is this not another trap? If we empty the capital and lose, the kingdom falls." The mention of Osric Castle silenced the hawks. The memory of that slaughter remained an open wound. The general faltered, unable to argue against the grim reality of that past defeat. Another officer stepped up. "A hasty strike is unwise. The Eagle's Nest is our strongest fortress, well-provisioned and manned by thousands. If Count Eisenberg holds, the Solonians, who are poor at sieges, will tire, especially as winter approaches. We should consolidate our forces and wait for the right moment to strike or force a retreat." This cautious approach gained immediate support from the officials. "General Hans is right. Safety first. The fortress can hold. Winter is our ally. We strike when they are frozen and starving." Catherine's brow remained furrowed. She had no faith in her father's ability to hold, yet she couldn't risk the capital's remaining strength on a gamble. She needed a dual strategy. "Enough." Catherine's cold voice cut through the room. "Count Eisenberg is a pillar of the state, but the court cannot rely on one man alone. Issue the decree." Queen Mother Catherine commanded. "In the king's name, issue an urgent decree. Count Rockefort, Prince Consort I, Count Bowles von Herix, Duke Schmidt, and Count Eichberg must mobilize all available forces and march to the royal capital immediately." She selected these nobles for their royal ties, proven combat records, or immense strategic influence. This was a final attempt to consolidate the kingdom's remaining loyal and mobile forces. Second, the capital is under emergency status. Move all grain and able-bodied men inside the walls. Seal the gates, entry only. Reinforce defenses, dig trenches, and enforce a strict curfew. Any rumor-mongers will be executed. Third, the Ordnance Bureau must produce weapons day and night. The Ministry of Livelihood will secure 3 months of supplies for the city. Fourth, send messengers to Eglinus to encourage Count Eisenberg. Tell him reinforcements are coming. If he fails, he will pay with his head. The Queen Mother's decisive orders restored a sliver of order to the panicked court. Suddenly, her sharp gaze swept the room and froze. Someone was missing. Count William, the Minister of Livelihood responsible for the kingdom's finances and grain, was absent. "Where is Count William?" she demanded, her voice chilling. An official nervously stepped forward. "Your Majesty, he requested leave yesterday due to a severe cold." Catherine's lips curled into a cold, menacing smile. The pieces clicked into place. How did the Solonians know the capital's defenses and grain stores so well? It was William, the man who pushed to concentrate resources in the capital and confirmed the Solonian intelligence. His active preparations now appeared to be a calculated trap. "A cold?" the Queen Mother hissed. "He's a traitor fleeing justice." She slammed the table. "Commander of the Imperial Guard, surround Count William's estate. Search every inch. Kill anyone who resists. Seal the city gates. Find him dead or alive." The commander departed, leaving the court in terrified silence. If William was a Solonian spy, The capital's entire defense strategy was compromised. A wave of dread washed over the officials. They were exposed and betrayed. Catherine sat back, her eyes flashing with cold resolve. Between her father's weakness, Solonian cunning, and internal betrayal, the kingdom was on the brink. She regained her composure. You see, the traitor is among us. Abandon your selfishness and unite to defend the realm. Any further treason will result in the execution of your entire clan. We obey. The officials knelt, trembling. A royal messenger arrived in Conford with an urgent decree sealed by the king and the queen mother. To my dear son-in-law, Eglinist is in peril. The Solonians have besieged your grandfather, Count Eisenberg. The capital is terrified. The kingdom's survival hangs by a thread. Mobilize your elite forces immediately. March to the capital, join the other armies, and break the siege of Eglinist. As a royal relative, you must not watch the kingdom fall. The letter was signed by the Queen Mother herself, reminding me of our familial bond. I read the decree in my study, my face unreadable. I felt no excitement, no burden of kinship, and no fear. I stared out the window at the orderly, early winter landscape of Conford. Should I save the cowardly Count Eisenberg, or march into the potential death trap of the royal capital? I eventually nodded to the messenger. Tell the Queen Mother and the king, I obey. The Conford army will mobilize and march north. The messenger, relieved, offered platitudes about loyalty before retiring. I headed straight to the council hall. My core officers, Brendan, Edgar, Roland, Leon, Thorstein, Richter, Klein, and Werner, gathered, sensing the gravity of the situation. Brendan, I began, how is the plan to attack Golden City and Twin Rivers City? Brendan laid out a detailed map on the table. It outlined routes, troop deployments, and logistics for the offensive. The plan is ready, sir. We will use 8,000 men, led by myself, to strike the lightly defended Golden City via the southwest mountain path. Simultaneously, the Tyrol Regiment will feign an attack on Twin Rivers City to pin down the Solonian forces. Once Golden City falls, Twin Rivers will be isolated, allowing us to secure the northern frontier. Brendan spoke with confidence, his plan the result of months of intelligence gathering. Success would significantly boost Conford's strength and strategic position. I listened silently, my fingers tracing the map. When Brendan finished, I closed the folder. The plan is excellent, I said calmly. But it is cancelled. Cancelled? The officers were stunned. I summarized the Queen Mother's decree. The Solonian main force was besieging Eglinist, and we were ordered to march north to save Count Eisenberg. The room fell into a deathly silence. Their dreams of expansion were shattered by a dangerous, uncertain royal order. Sir, Brendan protested. Conford is small. A long-distance march with poor logistics is suicide. If the Solonians use besiege a point to strike reinforcements, we are doomed. And Count Eisenberg, he left the implication hanging. Was the Count even worth the risk? Edgar added, our supplies are for defense and local expansion. A long march will drain us, and the capital is bankrupt. This is a bottomless pit. Richter agreed. The risk is too high. If Eglinist falls before we arrive, we will be isolated. And there is no guarantee Eisenberg will even open his gates to us. The council debated the risks of the northern campaign, with everyone reluctant to go. Unlike the Hannibal operation, which had clear objectives and naval support, this mission to save a notorious relative felt like a suicide mission. I silenced the room. I knew the risks, but the order could not be openly defied. The Queen Mother has invoked our kinship and the title of Pillar of the State in a royal decree, I stated firmly. To refuse is disloyal, unfilial, and unjust. I cannot bear such a stigma. I scanned the room. I know the risks, which is why we won't stake everything on this relief effort. Golden City and Twin Rivers City won't fall quickly. If we get bogged down in a siege while the Solonians pivot, we'll be trapped. Pointing to Conford on the map, I declared, I will go north, but we will not commit our entire force. Roland, I called to the knight. Here. Roland stood. Take the 3rd Infantry Regiment, 3,000 men, and join me. Your experience is needed. Understood. Roland accepted without hesitation. Brendan, I turned to the veteran. My lord, You will remain to oversee Conford's defense. The 1st Infantry, the new militia, and all guards are under your command. Secure the Southwest Peninsula and the Tyrol line. Switch to a full defensive posture. No one leaves without my orders. This is our foundation. Brendan struck his chest. As long as I live, Conford stands. Edgar, I addressed the administrator. I am here. Manage all civil, financial, and logistical affairs. Prioritize winter rations and keep the peace while I am away. Understood, my lord. Edgar bowed. Leon, here. Select 300 of the finest cavalry from Thorstein's ranks. I need a mobile, elite force for scouting and rearguard duty. Leon's eyes gleamed at the chance for independent command. I will not fail you. Thorstein, I directed. Oversee the remaining cavalry training and patrols. Coordinate with Werner and Klein to keep our intelligence lines open. Understood, my lord. I turned to the naval commanders. Werner, Klein, maintain security in Amber Bay and Winters Port, but shift your focus. Monitor the field territory closely. With the capital in turmoil, we must watch for any moves from the Duke. Understood. We will guard the coast and watch the east, they replied. The orders were swift and decisive. My strategy was clear. Fulfill the duty to the capital with minimal force while safeguarding my own territory. 3 days to prepare. Edgar will handle logistics. We marched then. The council dispersed. I stood by the window, gazing at the northern sky. I had to go, not just because of the royal decree. If the capital fell and the Solonians seized the Eaglenist, the entire northern frontier would collapse. Conford would lose its buffer and face total destruction. Saving the Eaglenist was, in effect, buying time for my own home. I hope we aren't too late, I whispered. Outside, the night was filled with the sounds of mobilization. Horses neighed and laborers loaded supplies, the sounds of war preparation echoing through the castle walls. These noises were the backdrop to their final night. Princess Louise lay in my arms, eyes closed, though I knew she was awake. I felt her tension and heard her rapid heartbeat. After a distant horn blast, she whispered, "The army is leaving again? I've heard them since this afternoon." I pulled her closer. "Yes," I said calmly. "The Solonians are moving, and I must lead the relief force." I omitted the grim details of the siege and the risks involved. I would carry that burden alone. Louise looked up, her blue eyes reflecting the fireplace. You? You are going yourself?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Yes," I soothed her, patting her back. "I have a plan. I won't be throwing our lives away." "It's still dangerous," she cried, clutching my shirt. She knew my duty as a lord and general. Yet, every time I left for the northern front, her heart remained suspended in fear until my return. This time, the stakes felt higher than ever. "Trust me," I said with forced lightness. "It is my duty." Louise fell silent, acknowledging the heavy burden I carried for the realm and my people. She could not stop me, nor did she have the standing to try. All she could do was wait, pray, and offer her strength to support me, wherever I might be. She curled tighter into my embrace, arms wrapped around my waist, as if to brand my warmth into her skin and stretch this moment of peace into eternity. This embrace felt different from our usual nights of comfort. The impending departure made every touch heavy with unspoken longing and unease. I held her, resting my chin on her fragrant hair, feeling her steady breathing against my chest. Amidst this intimacy, my thoughts drifted back to the pier where my mother, Lady Irene, had departed days ago, and her parting words. "Perhaps you should consider adding a new member to this family? A little one would bring so much joy and hope." My mother's smiling face seemed to appear before me. "Besides, Carl, as a lord, you face constant dangers. A clear heir would not only complete your family, but reassure your loyal soldiers that Conford's banner has a future. It is vital for stability." In the silence of the night, my mother's words struck me like thunder. I was heading back to war, facing treacherous enemies and an uncertain fate. The woman in my arms was not just my wife and a Plantagenet princess. She was the potential vessel for my legacy and the future of Conford. A child, a promise, a future, a symbol that Conford would survive even if I fell. Brendan, Edgar, Leon, and my subjects needed that symbol. My mother was right. In chaotic times, an heir was the ultimate anchor for loyalty. A surge of desire, fueled by deep affection and a sense of duty, threatened to shatter my restraint. I tightened my grip, my breath hitching. Just once. Could I leave a hope behind before I left? Yet, a cold, poisonous memory surfaced. Count Rockefeller's warning in France City. Do not have a child with the princess, Carl. Do you understand what a royal heir would mean? It would be an unbreakable shackle. It would bind you, Conford, and Charlotte to the Plantagenet chariot forever. There would be no turning back. It would be total ruin. Shackle, royal blood, ruin. Reason and desire clashed like trapped beasts. On one side, the longing for continuity. On the other, the cold political calculations of my father-in-law. I knew the Count was right. A child with both Plantagenet and Schmidt blood would bind me inextricably to a sinking royal house. It could cut off all other paths, nailing me to the royal ship. But the warmth in my arms was real, and the fear of my impending departure was heavy. I was just a man, heading to war, longing to leave a mark of my existence. Political calculations felt pale against the primal urge to leave a legacy. Just this once. A devil's whisper pushed open the door of my reason. My hand moved of its own accord, trembling slightly as it traced the curve of her spine beneath her silk nightgown. The heat of her skin was like a spark hitting dry grass. Louise stiffened, then buried her face deeper into my chest, her breathing faltering. She softened, yielding to me completely. The fireplace crackled, casting a warm glow. The world outside faded, leaving only this dark, intimate space where two hearts sought courage and planted the seeds of an uncertain future. In the deep night, our entanglement grew. My gamble was a stone cast into the river of fate, creating ripples that would reach far beyond this moment. The princess stiffened, as if struck by an invisible needle or a deer sensing a predator. She felt the intensity of my grip, the abnormal heat, and the possessive nature of my touch. She was no naive girl. She understood immediately that this was no longer a simple, comforting embrace. My touch was predatory, a declaration of desire that threatened to tear away the veil of our political marriage. She did not scream or push me away. Shock and her deep reliance on me caused her to hold her breath, her heart seemingly stopping. She stared into the darkness, trying to read my face in the flickering firelight. She searched my eyes for a hint of hesitation or guilt, anything that would allow her to steer things back to control. I held her, my gaze locked onto hers, waiting, testing. I saw the panic in her eyes, like a startled bird. Yet, beneath the panic, there was no fierce resistance or disgust. Instead, I felt a rigid submission, a stillness, and perhaps, in the depths of her eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible acquiescence. She did not fight back. That tiny signal was the spark that ignited my suppressed desires and frustrations. The last barrier of my reason crumbled. I closed my eyes and took a deep, greedy breath. I inhaled her scent, mixed with the room's wood smoke, but overwhelmed by the turmoil in my own chest. It was a mix of long-held love, resentment toward the royal marriage, anxiety about the war, and a desperate, defiant need to claim this moment as my own. All these emotions churned like molten lava in my veins. My hand moved with newfound, irresistible resolve. My palm, calloused and burning, slid firmly beneath the silk of her nightgown. Pushing aside the cool fabric, my hand claimed the warm, smooth skin of her back, finally bringing her entirely under my control. An electric shock surged through me and the princess. She gasped, her body stiffening and trembling as a faint whimper escaped her throat. I let out a low, satisfied sigh, as if finally reaching the long-coveted source of a spring. My hand roamed her smooth back with urgent, possessive intent, sliding from her waist to her shoulder blades. I felt her cool skin warm under my touch, sensing her tremors and ragged breathing. This slow, suggestive caress acted as a silent call to action. No longer content with lying on my side, I rolled over, using my superior strength and weight to pin the princess beneath me. My broad shoulders blocked the hearth fire, casting a shadow that enveloped the princess, trapping her within my presence. A crushing sense of capture and helplessness overwhelmed the princess, leaving her with nowhere to escape. My hot, rapid breath, like a wind carrying sparks, washed over her sensitive neck and collarbone. My rough, newly sprouted stubble grazed the delicate skin of her neck, triggering a shiver of sharp, electric sensation that made her scalp tingle. My kiss lost its previous tenderness, replaced by a raw, demanding intensity. My kisses turned predatory, biting and sucking as they trailed down her slender neck to her collarbone, leaving wet, searing marks. Each kiss was a brand of ownership, each suction a consuming passion that ignited a strange fire beneath her skin. Desire seized my youthful, robust body, clouding the eyes that had once been clear and resolute. I began to undo the intricate silk ribbons on the princess's nightgown with urgent, almost rough movements. My fingers, clumsy with excitement yet stubbornly persistent, fumbled with her gown as my ragged, scorching breath hit her chest, raising goosebumps across her skin. No. As the first ribbon gave way and cool air touched her skin, the princess finally found her voice, jolted from her state of shock and desire. Her voice was a weak, trembling whimper. She feebly pushed against my solid chest with her slender arms. Yet, her struggles against my strength were futile, appearing less like resistance and more like a provocative invitation that only fueled my primal instinct to conquer. "Carl, no. Please don't." Her plea was fragmented and weak, shattered by my kisses and ragged breaths. Tears streamed uncontrollably into her hair, yet her body remained caught in a conflicted state of honest, involuntary desire. While her mind was torn by fear, shame, and a sense of betrayal, her body, that of a healthy, mature woman, responded uncontrollably to my aggressive advances. A strange, surging pleasure flooded her, weakening her limbs and clashing violently against her rational resistance. Her skin grew hypersensitive, each of my touches sparking like electricity. A hollow, aching throb bloomed deep within her, and her feeble resistance softened into a hesitant, inviting languor. Like any normal woman, she possessed natural physiological needs and emotional desires. During our time together, my handsomeness, talent, care, and heroic aura had long since left an indelible mark on her heart. A young girl naturally harbors romantic fantasies, though hers had long been suppressed by strict etiquette and her commitment to Henry. In this isolated night, heavy with the threat of parting, my aggressive, masculine presence finally awakened the desires she had long suppressed. My mind descended into chaos as a storm of conflicting thoughts collided. A dangerous, seductive thought coiled in her mind like a serpent. She couldn't resist my overwhelming strength and resolve. Perhaps she should simply yield. After all, she was soon to be my wife, and with me facing such peril tomorrow, this might be my final wish. How could she let me leave with such regret, especially if I never returned? This thought, a mix of self-sacrificial tragedy and hedonistic temptation, caused her tense nerves and resolve to fatally crumble. Her body betrayed her internal conflict. Her resistance faded, her muscles softened, and she began to unconsciously yield to my weight, her whimpers a mix of agony and secret pleasure. Just as I sensed her softening and surged forward with frantic intensity, poised to breach her final defenses, the moment hung in a precarious balance. Amidst the haze of passion, a sudden, chilling clarity pierced through. Henry, the face of the young scholar in Play City, who had earned my trust and respect through our prior commitment, suddenly flashed into her mind. Henry's eyes, usually warm and smiling, seemed to gaze at her now with silent, disappointed inquiry. She recalled her vow to Henry, a betrothal built upon mutual respect. Even during her previous intimate moments with me, she had carefully guarded her virtue, honoring her commitment to Henry and her own integrity. If I let this happen here, my final boundary would be shattered. All excuses, coercion, helplessness, or the desire to spare him regret would ring hollow. This would no longer be a fleeting kiss or embrace. It would be a total surrender and a betrayal. As the tide of desire receded, she wondered how she would face herself when tomorrow's sunlight filled the room, and how she would look back on this night in the years to come. Should she frame this as a romantic wartime tragedy, or admit it was merely a regrettable lapse born of force and half-hearted compliance? No, it could never be the latter. She refused to let this night be remembered only as a blur of physical indulgence, a hollow aftermath of regret, and a source of eternal self-loathing regarding her betrayal of Henry. A moment of weakness and indulgence could forge a lifetime of regret. In that instant, reason crushed her surging desires with unprecedented resolve. Just as I rejoiced at her softening and prepared to make my final move, the hazy mist in the princess's eyes suddenly crystallized into cold, icy resolve. Summoning every ounce of strength from her body and soul, she stopped her weak resistance and instead threw her arms around my neck, locking me in a desperate, suffocating embrace. I faltered, misinterpreting her embrace as surrender. Seizing the opening, the princess lunged forward and sank her teeth into my shoulder with every ounce of her fear, rage, and desperate resolve to protect her virtue. Hiss! I gasped in pain. The sharp, searing pain acted as a brutal wake-up call, instantly piercing through my desire-numbed nerves and dragging me out of the abyss of passion. I groaned in pain, instinctively loosening my grip and recoiling to escape her sudden assault. We broke apart abruptly, leaving me in the dim room where only the hearth fire cast flickering, restless shadows against the walls. The air hung heavy with lingering desire and the faint scent of blood. We stared at each other, gasping, the distance between us now an impassable chasm. I gasped, my chest heaving. I instinctively clutched my shoulder, my fingers meeting a wet, sticky patch and the deep indentation of teeth marks. I pulled my hand away. In the flickering firelight, two deep, blood-stained rows of teeth marks marred my left shoulder near the neck, the surrounding skin already swelling into a ghastly red. The sharp pain shattered my desire, replacing it with shock, bewilderment, and a surge of indignant resentment at being rejected. I never expected such a fierce, primal counterattack just as the atmosphere peaked and she seemed to surrender. Then, my gaze met the princess's face. I lay on the bed with Princess Louise, whose disheveled silk pajamas revealed skin marked by my recent passion. Her hair was messy, and her chest heaved with ragged breaths, yet her previous intoxicating desire had vanished completely. Tears traced paths down her face, glistening in the firelight, a mix of pain, humiliation, and internal struggle. Her swollen lips bore a trace of my blood, but it was her gaze that made my heart tighten. Her eyes, usually clear or sorrowful, were now unnervingly cold and sharp, as if washed by ice. Gone was the panic and lust. In their place remained a desolate stubbornness, profound sadness, and a chilling, resolute clarity. That gaze pierced through my lingering agitation, leaving me with a sharp, stinging sense of shame I dared not acknowledge. The air grew heavy with the scent of blood and a suffocating silence. Only the crackling fireplace and our ragged, uncalmed breathing filled the cooling space. The aftermath of our struggle and the sudden cold air left a fragile, awkward silence between us. The pain in my shoulder was sharp, but Louise's sorrowful, stubborn eyes unsettled me more. Her gaze extinguished my desire, leaving behind a hollow, burning ache. Just as I moved to withdraw, Louise, driven by a sudden surge of pity and guilt, reached out. She wrapped her arms around my tense frame, pressing her cheek against my sweat-dampened neck in a gesture of comfort. This embrace was a clear act of submission and reconciliation. "I'm sorry, Carl," she sobbed against my skin, her breath warm against my pulse. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but I can't do this. Please, forgive me." Her tears dampened my skin, softening my heart, and replacing my fire with deep remorse and pity for the trembling woman. My tense muscles relaxed under her tearful, soft embrace. The lingering anger and lust vanished, leaving only a sense of empty, damp exhaustion. I sighed, filled with self-loathing, and rested my forehead against her hair. "I'm the one who should apologize." Louise shook her head against my neck, tears flowing freely. "No, I was too." "No, Louise," I interrupted, using her name without titles for the first time. "I broke our agreement and lost control. I almost caused a disaster." "Agreement?" Louise pulled back slightly, looking at me with tear-filled, confused eyes. "What agreement do we have?" She assumed he meant noble etiquette or some unspoken understanding. I offered a bitter smile, my gaze drifting into the distance. I hesitated, gathering the courage to confront a secret I had long kept buried. "Not with you," I said softly, my words rippling through her. With myself, or rather, with a girl I love. Louise stiffened, releasing her hold to stare at me in silence. I recounted my promise, to remain faithful, to grow stronger for her, and to protect our future. But look, I continued, my voice strained. I wavered in my heart due to politics and your presence. And now, I almost betrayed her physically. If you hadn't stopped me, I touched the bite mark on my shoulder with gratitude. If not for you, I would have become the kind of hypocrite I despise. Thank you, Your Highness. The confession hit Louise like a thunderbolt. She recoiled, sitting up and staring in disbelief at the man who had just tried to force himself upon her. You have someone you love, too? She stammered, shocked. I was taken aback. What do you mean by too? The word acted as a key, unlocking Louise's own hidden door. Her own secret, long suppressed, spilled out in this moment of shared vulnerability. Seeking resonance, she blurted out, I do. His name is Henry, a young scholar at the Royal Academy who studies history and astronomy. I met him when I was still allowed to visit the library in the royal capital. Her tone softened as she recalled their time together, discussing books, observing stars, and finding rare moments of happiness under the Empress's strict control. Before I left for the northern frontier, I promised him I would remain pure, keeping a place for him in my heart. But now... She looked at her disheveled clothes and the bite mark on me, consumed by shame and self-loathing. I broke my vow. I am a hypocrite, a slut. I don't deserve his love. Don't say that. I stopped her, my own shame replaced by a sense of shared responsibility. It wasn't your fault. I was the one who lost control. You resisted and stopped me. You kept your vow. You should be proud. My comfort was sincere. After revealing my feelings for Charlotte, I saw Louise not as a political obstacle, but as a fellow sufferer. Like two prisoners in the dark, they had glimpsed the forbidden, soft places in each other's hearts. The topic was too heavy and intimate to pursue further. After a brief silence, they tacitly agreed to stop their competition of self-reproach. My gaze drifted back to the princess. Her pajamas remained disheveled from their earlier struggle, exposing her fair skin and delicate collarbone in the flickering firelight. The sight was a vivid, unintended visual that immediately reignited my primal instincts, despite my rational mind screaming for restraint. My body reacted with an honesty that defied my attempts at composure, my physical arousal becoming impossible to ignore. Princess Louise immediately sensed the shift in my gaze and the sudden, suffocating tension in the air. Blushing deeply, she scrambled to pull her clothes together, her fingers trembling as she clumsily tied the silk ribbons. Let's sleep, she whispered, her voice thin and frantic, desperate to end the awkwardness. Right, I replied, forcing myself to look away. Embarrassed by my lack of control, I stiffly rolled to the far side of the bed, putting a full arm's length between them. They lay side by side in silence, the only sound their heavy, labored breathing echoing in the dim room. Yet, reason could not immediately command my body to follow suit. While guilt for Charlotte and Louise suppressed my intent, my physical arousal remained like a restless beast. The intensity of their confession and the forbidden nature of the scene kept my young body in a state of high agitation. The physiological reaction only became more pronounced as I tried to calm down. Despite facing away, Louise's heightened sensitivity allowed her to perceive my unnatural state. Her face burned with heat, and she buried her head in the pillow, heart racing, pretending to be asleep to hide her turmoil. I, acutely aware of my predicament, turned away and sighed, trying to relax my body and wait for the inevitable subsidence. I cursed my lack of control, fearing I had shattered the delicate balance between them. The room felt thick with the residue of their emotional collision and raw confessions. Though separated by a physical gap, neither could find peace of mind. They tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every spring in the mattress seemed to protest, and the wool blanket felt abrasive against their skin. I listened to my own pulse and the princess's uneven, suppressed breathing. Eventually, my physical agitation ebbed, leaving behind a hollow fatigue and the stinging reminder of the bite marks on my shoulder. Yet, my mind remained in chaos. Thoughts of Charlotte, my impulse toward the princess, and my uncertain future swirled in my head. Louise was equally restless, the heat of my touch lingering on her skin, her mind haunted by the memory of my blood on her lips. The contrast between Henry's gentleness and my aggressive intensity left her feeling shattered. She felt a mix of guilt for her near lapse, fear, and a strange, inexplicable resonance with my own confession about my beloved. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts, but only deepened the entanglement. The silence of the room was punctuated only by the crackle of embers and their forced breathing. This silence acted as a net, fostering unspoken curiosities in the dark. My voice broke the silence, dry and sudden, startling me. Driven by a deep-seated unease, I asked, "What is your Henry's full name?" The scholar. The question felt natural in their current state of shared, guilty secrets. It was a strange, unspoken trust built upon their mutual vulnerability. Louise stirred, surprised by the inquiry. After a long silence, she replied with a bitter, nostalgic tone, "He is Henry de Rochefort, the eldest son of Count Rochefort. He was sent to the royal capital years ago to study history and philosophy at the Royal Academy." Rochefort. I had only asked to distract myself, but the name hit me like a lightning bolt, causing my body to tense instantly. It wasn't just the nobility of the name, it was the unsettling implications attached to it. The eldest son of Count Rochefort? Charlotte's brother? I turned abruptly, the bed creaking under my movement. In the dim light, I stared at the princess's curled silhouette, trying to see through the darkness. "What is it?" Louise turned to face me, their outlines blurred in the shadows. She was confused by my intense reaction. My mind raced, trying to dismiss the absurd coincidence. I asked again, my voice low and deadly serious. "What is his name?" "The full name." "Say it again." Louise grew uneasy at my solemnity. She hesitated before repeating, "Henry de Rochefort, the eldest son of Count Rochefort and the Countess, my friend." She emphasized friend to maintain the purity of their bond. "Henry de Rochefort," I repeated, each syllable striking my nerves like a hammer. The absurd suspicion was rapidly becoming a terrifying reality. A wave of ice-cold shock washed over me, instantly sobering my heated mind and leaving me shivering. I stared at the princess in the darkness, my expression a mix of shock and absurdity. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Louise felt unsettled by my gaze and whispered, "Carl, why did hearing that name affect you so?" I didn't answer directly, asking instead with a sense of fatalism, "Princess, do you know the name of the girl I love?" Louise shook her head, confused. She didn't know, as I had never mentioned her name. "I don't." "What is her name?" I closed my eyes, as if bracing myself to reveal a cruel, inescapable reality. "Charlotte," I said, my eyes bright in the gloom. "Charlotte de Rochefort." "Charlotte de Rochefort," Louise repeated, struggling to process the information. When the surname Rochefort clicked with the Henry de Rochefort she had mentioned earlier, a wave of sheer horror washed over her. She gasped, sitting up abruptly, her eyes wide as she stared at me in disbelief. She opened her mouth, but only ragged breaths escaped. Charlotte de Rochefort, the Count's daughter and Henry's sister. She remembered Henry mentioning his sister was a knight. She loved Henry, I loved Charlotte. They were siblings. The realization hit Louise like a block of ice. It was absurd. Fate had played a cruel joke. They were two people bound by a political marriage, each clinging to a secret love, only to discover their hearts were tethered to the same family. The irony left Louise speechless. Her mind went blank, filled only with the names and a rising, overwhelming sense of dread. If they ever escaped this marriage, she would become my sister-in-law, and I would become Henry's brother-in-law. More importantly, she had nearly slept with the man her lover's sister loved. The tangled, near-incestuous implications made her dizzy with nausea and regret. I was equally shaken, overcome by a chilling sense of horror. I had almost made a catastrophic mistake. Had I not stopped, I would have left an indelible mark on the woman who was my fiancée, my lover's brother's lover, and my own future sister-in-law. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a violation of ethical boundaries that would destroy my standing, alienate the Rochefort family, and ruin Confort. It was an ethical disaster that would cost me Charlotte, the Count's favor, and Louise's relationship with Henry. I couldn't bear to imagine Charlotte's judgment or the Count's wrath. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt a surge of gratitude for the pain of the bite that had stopped us. Louise, pale and trembling, realized the same. The thought of facing Henry or the sister she had never met made her feel sick. She felt a profound sense of shame and relief that the disaster had been averted. We stared at each other in the dark, stunned by the sheer weight of the coincidence. Finally, I offered a bitter, hollow smile. The world is truly small. The simple words captured the absurdity of their situation. Louise nodded stiffly. Yes, too small. Small enough to entangle two strangers in such a private and awkward way. Small enough for one mistake to unravel so many lives. The topic was too sensitive to continue. It only highlighted the abyss they had narrowly avoided. The shock of the revelation temporarily eclipsed their previous desires, leaving only a heavy sense of dread. Without another word, we turned away from each other, lying back to back. The invisible wall between us had grown wider and more solid. We closed our eyes, forcing ourselves to rest despite the names, Henry and Charlotte, haunting our thoughts. The night's events had left an indelible mark on our future. The room fell into a heavy silence, save for our uneven breathing in the pre-dawn cold. On the morning of November 18th, the wind whipped the flags outside Confort. The army stood in formation, a sea of steel under a leaden sky. Spears bristled like a forest, horses snorted, and supply wagons creaked over the frozen ground. Roland, in polished armor, directed the final formation while Leon's cavalry scouts moved ahead. I stood at the front, wearing my lord's cloak. I stood on foot, facing those who had come to see me off. Princess Louise stood at the front in dark hunting attire, her expression calm, but her eyes distant. Since that night, an awkward, fragile silence had replaced their former peace. "Princess, I entrust the territory to you," I said, my tone formal and distant. "Rest assured, Lord Carl. May you achieve victory and return safely," Louise replied with perfect etiquette. Only Brendan and Edgar noticed her fingers clenched tightly. We shared a brief, ritualistic embrace. I felt her stiffness and the deliberate distance she maintained. The truth of that night stood between us like an ice wall. The embrace was a public formality, devoid of affection and full of restraint. I pulled away and turned to Brendan and Edgar. "Brendan, I entrust the defense of Confort to you. Follow our plan. Hold firm and do not engage without my orders. Rest assured, my lord. As long as I stand, the city stands," Brendan declared, striking his chest. "Edgar, you are in charge of civil affairs and winter preparations. Consult with Brendan, Werner, and Klein if needed. I shall not fail you." Edgar bowed. "Werner, Klein, keep a close watch on the coast and the opposite shore." "Understood." I scanned my officers and soldiers. Without a long speech, I simply commanded, "Move out." "Understood. May you be victorious," the crowd responded. I mounted my horse, casting one last look at Louise, who watched me with an inscrutable expression. Turning away, I spurred my horse toward the northern road, kicking up dust. The army stirred like a waking beast. Infantry marched, cavalry rode, and supply wagons creaked into motion, filling the plains with the sounds of a march. The Confort banners fluttered in the cold wind as they joined the northward flow. I rode at the vanguard, listening to the rhythmic sounds of the marching army. My thoughts drifted back to the brutal battle of Confort last winter. I had been desperate, facing Harold's ferocious Solon army with broken walls. I and my people had fought for every inch, teetering on the edge of extinction. The Queen and King had ordered Count Eisenberg to reinforce them. How did he respond? He sent an elite force that left Eagle's Nest only to dawdle on the road. With endless excuses, muddy roads, low supplies, or minor Solon skirmishes, the reinforcements crawled like turtles. Only after Confort was soaked in blood and the Solonians retreated due to internal instability did Eisenberg's force arrive to mop up, claiming credit for a victory they didn't earn. I remembered that favor, well, Eisenberg's calculated move to preserve his own strength while letting others die. Now, the tides had turned. Eisenberg was trapped in Eagle's Nest, and I was the one sent to rescue him. Rescue? I sneered, a dark fire burning in my eyes. "Pass the order," I told my messenger calmly. "Tell Roland and Leon that the weather is harsh and the troops are exhausted. To preserve strength, we march only half days. Camp by afternoon." No rushing. Daily progress. 10 miles. 10 miles. The messenger blinked, stunned. With the new roads, they could reach France City in a day. 10 miles was a snail's pace. Did you not hear me? I asked, my gaze cold and absolute. Yes, my lord. 10 miles a day, safety first. The messenger scrambled to relay the order. The Conford army slowed immediately without question. Scouts pushed ahead, but the main force acted like they were on a stroll, stopping early to set up camp and dig trenches. It looked more like a winter drill than a desperate rescue mission. For 3 days, I watched my men execute my orders with cold satisfaction. Eisenberg had let me bleed. Now, Eisenberg would taste the agony of waiting. I would let Eisenberg feel his hope wither away behind the walls of Eagle's Nest. The journey that should have taken a day dragged on for 5. And this was only the beginning. As France City appeared on the horizon, I signaled a halt. My lord, shall we notify Count Rochefort? My adjutant asked. I stared at the city, lost in complex memories. France City was the vital supply hub and gateway to Eagle's Nest. Per the Queen's orders, I was to link up with the Count here. Not yet, I said. Camp 3 miles out. I will tell the Count we are exhausted and need 2 days to rest and resupply. Also, send scouts in all directions. Be thorough. We must ensure our flanks are secure before proceeding. Yes, the adjutant replied. I rode forward, my face calm, as if this were a routine patrol. Eisenberg, I whispered, enjoy your safety in Eagle's Nest. My reinforcements are on the way, but the road is long and winding. I'll take as long to save you as you took to save me. It's only fair. The biting wind whipped snow against my armor. The Conford army settled in outside France City, smoke rising from their campfires. At Eagle's Nest, the defenders surely waited in vain for the help that would never arrive on time. The sprawling camp outside France City was a stark sight on the winter plains. My troops were to rest here before joining Count Rochefort's forces for the front lines. With coordination required, I took a small escort and entered the heart of the Northern Territory. The streets were busy, but the atmosphere was heavy with the tension of impending war. Merchants spoke only of conflict, prices, and evacuation. I ignored them, heading straight for the governor's mansion. The guards, already notified, bowed and let me pass. My footsteps echoed through the solemn, empty corridors. Soon, I stood before the dark oak doors that held the power of the North. I knocked 3 times on the door. Enter. Count Rochefort's steady, emotionless voice replied. I entered the office, where the scent of books, leather, and tobacco permeated the warmth of the fireplace. The Count stood before a map of the northern frontier, his back to the door, ignoring my arrival. Count, I said, bowing at a respectful distance. The Count turned, his initial surprise quickly replaced by a composed expression. He gestured for me to sit, then took his own seat behind the desk. You've arrived with your troops, the Count stated flatly. Yes, my lord, I replied. 3,000 men and 300 cavalry, under my personal command. The Count sipped his tea, observing me through the steam. Slower than I expected, the Count remarked, tapping his desk. Not the speed I saw during the Battle of Carnford. I smiled faintly. I am merely following a proven standard of march. I enunciated clearly. The standard speed Count Eisenberg used to reinforce Carnford seemed worth emulating. Silence filled the room. The crackle of the fireplace underscored the unspoken tension between them. They both understood the implication. They were stalling, hoping Eisenberg would either perish or be crippled by the Solonians before they arrived. A flicker of cold approval crossed the Count's eyes. He felt no sympathy for his rival, Eisenberg. He offered no critique, turning his gaze back to the map to reevaluate the front. This silence served as a tacit agreement. Both men shared the same goal: preserve their own strength while letting their rival be consumed. The atmosphere was one of mutual political calculation. Suddenly, the Count's gaze fixed on my neck as I loosened my cloak. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. I felt the chill of the Count's stare, confused. The Count stared for several seconds, his expression cold and detached. I dislike interfering in your private life, Carl. But, he pointed to his own neck. Are you keeping a dangerous pet? An unruly hound, perhaps. I froze, my hand reaching toward my neck before stopping midair. The memory of the previous night, the chaos, the struggle, and Louise's desperate bite, flashed in my mind. I had forgotten to check for the mark. Embarrassment and panic flushed my face. I couldn't find my voice. The Count observed my visible distress. The mark was clearly a human bite. Given my position and the circumstances, the culprit was obvious. A complex emotion flickered in the Count's eyes. He leaned forward, interlacing his fingers on the desk. It seems, our young prince consort, that your mode of interaction with the princess in the northern frontier is quite intense. I'm curious how far things went. Our princess is not as gentle as she appears. The air in the office grew stifling. The Count's gaze pierced through me. I felt exposed. My private shame was laid bare. I stammered. I realized any excuse about marital duty would be pathetic under the Count's scrutiny. I lowered my head, sighing in defeat. It was the princess, I admitted hoarsely. The Count remained silent, his gaze still fixed on me like cold blades. I knew I had to be honest. It happened the night before last, I continued. We had been sleeping together, but that night, I was leaving. I struggled to speak. I lost control and forced myself on her. She stopped me at the last moment by biting me. We stopped. I looked at the Count, pleading. Nothing else happened. If she hadn't stopped me, the consequences. I left the thought unfinished. The political fallout of such an act would have been catastrophic. The room was deathly silent. Finally, the Count spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. Aside from that, is there any trouble that needs handling? I understood the implication, the risk of pregnancy. I shook my head firmly. No, absolutely not. I swear, it didn't go that far. Enough. Count Rochefort stopped me with a gesture. He stood and walked to the fireplace, back to me, his silhouette imposing. Perhaps, the Count said, his voice cold but less sharp, you should thank the princess for her restraint and clarity. The word struck me like a needle. I understood the implication. Louise's rationality had prevented a scandal, a child of royal and Schmidt blood, that would have dragged everyone, especially Charlotte, into an abyss. I understand, I said, bowing my head in profound shame. I was ashamed of my impulsive mistake and that I had required my father-in-law to point out the consequences. I looked up, my voice trembling but earnest. Count, I have a shameless request. Please, do not tell Charlotte. Let me tell her myself. Whatever her anger or punishment, I deserve it, but I want to explain it to her personally. I bowed my head, awaiting judgment. I knew hearing this from her father would devastate her. The Count turned to face me. He lit his pipe, took a deep draw, and exhaled a cloud of smoke. His face remained obscured and inscrutable behind the haze. I agree, the Count stated firmly, but not for your sake, but for Charlotte's. I won't have her learn that the man she loves was entangled with another woman, nearly ruining himself. It would destroy her. He stared at me. I will keep this secret for now, but remember, you owe this to Charlotte and to me. Resolve your twisted relationship with the princess immediately. I will not have my daughter's future husband burdened by such messes. I understand. Thank you, Count. I felt a weight lift, replaced by heavy guilt. The Count's words were harsh but true. I owed Charlotte everything. The topic seemed exhausted. The office fell into a heavy, oppressive silence. I knew it was time to leave and process this. If there is nothing else, I shall take my leave, I said formally. My troops will rest outside the city for 2 days. I will enter the city afterward to discuss the strategy for Eglinist. The Count nodded, returning his attention to his documents as if the conversation had never occurred. As I reached for the door, the Count spoke again. Carl. I turned. The Count tapped his pipe against the desk. He looked into the void, not at me. His expression was calm, yet his eyes held complex, deep emotions. He paused, as if deciding whether to speak. I have a secret, he said, his voice low. One you should know, regarding Charlotte, and you. My heart hammered against my ribs. What secret? Was Charlotte in danger? Was this about their agreement? What is it? I asked, my voice tight, my eyes betraying a mix of fear and anticipation. The Count set his pipe down with deliberate, mechanical movements. He stared into the fire, his gaze distant. His face was cold, his ice-blue eyes reflecting the flames. Charlotte, the Count said, and my blood seemed to freeze. Gave birth to your son. Time stopped. I stood frozen, my face a mask of shock, devoid of emotion. My eyes were blank, staring at the Count as if the words were an incomprehensible language. I stood like a statue, my breathing ceased. A coal popped in the fireplace, breaking the silence and pulling me back to reality. The Count waited patiently. After a long moment, I stammered. Charlotte gave birth to my son? Each word was heavy and forced. Yes, the Count replied. Born in mid-May. He is nearly 5 months old. Charlotte named him Klein. Klein. The name anchored the news in reality. My mind raced in a chaotic frenzy. My son. Charlotte's son. Klein. I began to calculate. Their last meeting, the only time they had crossed the line, was last July. The date had been a blur of passion and sorrow. But mid-May, 10 months later. It all adds up, I whispered, my voice hoarse. The timeline was perfect. That night, a treasure and a nightmare had borne fruit. A life with my blood had existed for 5 months, and I, the father, had known nothing. A wave of shock, ecstasy, and sharp, agonizing guilt washed over me. I was overwhelmed by the miracle of life and the crushing weight of my absence. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. I couldn't fathom why they had hidden this for 5 months. My son was growing, and I had been a fool, completely unaware. The Count remained unmoved, his expression one of detached insight. Count Rockefort leaned back, his gaze sharp. This was Charlotte's decision, he stated calmly. I was stunned. The situation was clear, the Count continued. You had just received the imperial marriage decree to wed Princess Louise.